Hello and welcome to the Weekly Stuff Podcast with Jonathan Lack.
And Sean Chapman.
We are here to talk about stuff this week on the show. Got the big new movie out in theaters right now, The Batman, which we've both been very excited for. We will be reviewing that at length on today's show. I really liked it. Sean, what about you?
It's fucking great. They did it, Jonathan. Hollywood made an actual Batman movie. Like, they made a live-action movie featuring Batman, and it kicks ass.
It does kick ass. It's so weird, Sean, because this has been my reaction that I've been telling people is like, oh, they finally made a Batman movie. And then I say that and it sounds silly because this is like the 10th Batman movie.
Yeah.
But there's a lot. I was talking to my brother the other night after I saw it, and we were both talking about this. There's so much in this movie that it's honestly low-hanging fruit for Batman, but just them taking it for the first time. Like, he's a detective. He doesn't kill people. He fights like a ninja. He has a character arc. Just the most basic stuff that, like, we all love from Batman in every other media other than live-action movies. And now it's in a live-action movie. And I know it seems like damning with faint praise, but also, it's awesome.
Yeah. It's like, there's two things that are satisfying about it. One is, as a Batman fan, as you say, of like Batman in all other mediums, where he is a, like, fantastical take on a hard-boiled detective character, because that's just what he is. And the live-action movies have never done that. So this does that, and that's satisfying. But it also just does it at an extremely high level. So it's not just, like, fun because you're a Batman fan. It's just a really well-done movie. I mean, there's a couple of things that they could have done a little bit better. I think probably everyone thinks that the ending is a bit too long and stuff like that. But in general, I think it's just a great movie. That is very much, it tickled my Batman-loving heart in a way that even more than I was expecting. I was super excited for it, but it was even better than I had hoped.
Yeah, so that's our spoiler-free review. If you haven't seen it, it's long, very worth it. Go see it.
It doesn't feel long. I mean, it has that, like, it's got a slow burn to it because it's a neo-noir movie, so it needs to. But yeah, like, other than a couple of stuff near the end, I think generally, I was not bothered at all by its length. Which
we just rewatched.
I'm very famous for my, like, if you make a movie over 90 minutes long, you need to, like, get people to make a fucking petition about it or some shit to get permission to make a long movie. But this earns its length.
Oh, 100%. Like, we have recently on our Batman on Film series rewatched the Nolan movies. This feels shorter than Nolan movies.
Yeah, it much better earns its length than certainly, like, the fucking Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, I mean, I think The Batman, the new one, has a slightly awkward second to third act transition. Nowhere near on the level of, like, the Dark Knight's transition or the Dark Knight Rises being all first act, like that kind of thing. Anyway, It's a great movie. I'm really excited to break it down with you, Sean. Just nerd out over a Batman movie that's good. But we've also been playing the shit out of Elden Ring. I don't know about you, Sean. I'm playing an unhealthy amount of it. I'm like 34 hours on my play clock, and that's been, since I was only 8 hours in last time, that's a terrifying amount of the last 7 days for me. Like, over a seventh of it has just been Elden Ring.
Yeah, I think I've maybe played even more than that. I don't know what my hour count is, but yeah, it is, like, other than, like, Genshin Impact, which is a kind of its own thing because that's like a, that's a lifetime game, not a, you just, like, sort of play it. It consumes your entire life for just, like, a week. It consumes your entire life in a very different way than Elden Ring does. Other than that, I can't think of when the last time I played a game that so completely grabbed me and I'm just utterly obsessed with. Like, I'm now consistently staying up about an hour plus later than I normally would just because I can't stop playing Elden Ring.
Yes.
Like, it's that kind of thing of where, like, I'm having dreams about playing Elden Ring. It's been a while. I think maybe the last time I had a game other than Genshin Impact that did that might have been Red Dead Redemption 2. There's something about Elden Ring that is just so all-consuming, and it's just so fucking good. That, yes, I've been playing it completely obsessively.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's most of my stuff is the Batman and the Elden Ring. Do you have any other stuff?
No, I mean, it's just been Elden Ring, as I want to try to respect the voice director's choice that it's a dactyl, it's stress, unstress, unstress. Every actor calls it Elden Ring. It's not Elden Ring, it's Elden Ring. So I've been very careful about your pronunciation.
I do love that FromSoft games have gotten, I mean, as big as games can get, basically,
Yes.
at this point, and they still have all the same weird eccentricities, like the voice acting being kind of terrible, but in that way, fucking brilliant. Like,
It's got this very like hyper theatrical quality to it. That it sounds like the same kind of voice acting that fucking Demon's Souls had in like 2008. Yeah.
So yeah, more on Elden Ring in a second. My only other stuff, and just to update people on where the podcast is going in the next couple weeks, is I've been binging through the first season of the anime Jujutsu Kaisen, and we are going to be doing kind of like what we did with Kimetsu no Yaiba Demon Slayer last year, reviewing season 1, and then there's this new movie coming out, and we'll review that as well. So that show is fucking great.
Yeah, it is.
I don't want to spoil anything if you haven't seen it. It's a twisty ass show.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen a shonen anime burn through as many subgenres of shonen anime in as short a period of time and like get off to the ground running so fast. It's a crazy show. Also, maybe has my favorite anime ending of all time. Oh my god.
Oh yes, yeah. The ending to Jujutsu Kaisen is like already legendary, I feel. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Particularly the part when Gojo Satoru comes in and he starts his dance. It's just like you're like, how could a show have any more swagger than Jujutsu Kaisen? I don't think it's possible.
Having Mr. Bushido in that part doing the things he does, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great show. I'm excited. I haven't started my rewatch of the first season yet because of the aforementioned Elden Ring. But I'll get into that too because it's a great show.
It's so fun. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's talk about Elden Ring.
How?
Sean,
how do we even talk about this game? Like I
don't know.
There's a good chance that we have done completely different things. Because even though I've spent an insane amount of time this week playing it, there's a massive chunks of this game I haven't even like glimpsed at yet.
Well, that's the thing. Maybe to start with is this. I feel like the more I see of the game, the more intimidated I am by the scope of it. Because you can be 30 plus hours in and just starting to realize how big the game is. Like, it feels like the biggest game ever made to me. Not just in the sense of the landmass, which is really big, but I think there's probably like Assassin's Creed Odyssey or something probably has an even bigger landmass.
Red Dead 2's map is, in a like square mileage way bigger than the map in Elden Ring. But
Elden Ring is dense.
Yeah.
This is a game, you pick a direction, go for 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, you will find something that could consume your whole day, and that's every day with this game. Just to let people know my general progress with it, last week I had done Stormvale Castle, which is your first sort of objective that they sort of gently point you towards. But since then, I've only done one other of the Grand Runes, which is the Academy of Rhea Lucaria, which I finished last night. Other than that, it's just been exploring, getting into trouble, going on adventures, finding an area I'm just woefully unprepared for, having fun with it anyway. You know, Sean, this might be the greatest game ever made. That's like a thought that keeps running through my mind as I play it. It's like, this is a phenomenal fucking game, and it's so fucking dense and big.
Yeah, because I think it seems like some of the stuff we've done is similar. Because like the last time we talked about it, I was like right about to fight Margit the Fell Omen again, who's sort of like that first major bossy encounter if you follow the sort of critical path or whatever that they point you towards, that I had fought when I was like level 5 or something, like right at the beginning of the game, got killed 2 or 3 times and said, I feel like you're not supposed to be level 5 fighting this guy, because you're not. Like that character is definitely as like first bosses in Souls games go, he's definitely like, I think, a step up above most stuff, because I think he is really meant to make you feel, oh, I shouldn't just be banging my head against this guy because I rode my horse past this, that, this, and that, and the other thing on my way here. And I was very glad that I picked a class that like is particularly, I picked the bandit class that is particularly hard early on, because it starts so low level, because it meant, like, it encouraged me to break out of that Souls mindset very early and say, let me not just bang my head against this boss over and over again, which is the masochistic thing that Souls players do, which is just like,
Right.
fuck it, I don't care that this boss is incredibly hard, I'm just going to keep on doing this until I beat him. And instead I went off on my crazy adventure, where I ended up, as I talked about in last week's podcast, I got teleported to the Caelid Wastes, where the Scarlet Rot is, deep in the eastern edges of that map.
That happened to me this week, and Jesus Christ, yeah. Anyway,
yeah, and so that happened. I'm like that. I know most of the proper nouns of the game now, so whenever I feel like I think about or can talk about Elden Ring, it's always just like, it sounds like the coolest thing ever because all the shit in the game is so cool. I went on that adventure and found a bunch of random shit over there, and got into hijinks, and then worked my way back west towards the Limgrave area, fought a dragon, which was fucking rad, and then came and then was like ready to go fight Margit again. So since then, I did all of the Stormvale Castle stuff, and that was fun because I was definitely way more powerful. Like, I kind of breezed through a lot of that stuff. I absolutely bodied Godric the Grafted, because that is definitely, I was like, again, I had fought so much stuff that was way above my level when I got teleported away, so coming back to him was like, oh, I'm just gonna stomp this dude. But that was a cool boss fight. And then I've been really very thorough in how I've been exploring the game. So I like went through Limgrave with a kind of fine-tooth comb, trying to find everything I could. Then I've done most of the stuff on the western side of the map. So all the, like, the Lake of Liurnia. I've done all the stuff in the Academy of Raya Lucaria. And then there's like a further section north of that, not the Volcano Manor, which I haven't gone that far yet, but there's like there's another area that's like, I forget what the name of the family is. I think it's like the Carrion family or something, but
it's their manor, right?
Yes, their manor.
Yeah.
I've done that and met some characters, and I've done a bunch of the like I don't know how much of this stuff you've done, but the kind of like quests or whatever that are very Dark Souls style. There's no quest log, but there are different side characters you encounter in the world, and the people at the round table hold that there are a bunch of sort of side quests you can go on. And some of that stuff is a lot more like involved than I feel like it has typically been in Souls games. So I've been doing a lot of that because there's a major quest line that involves a character named Ronnie over there. That then has sent me back. So where I currently am, as I'm back in the Scarlet Rot, following a different quest line, and I'm pretty close. I think I'm going to go challenge General Radon, who is over there in the eastern side of the map.
Yeah, so I don't even think I could summarize for you everything I've done this week because it's been such a crazy journey. Mm-hmm. But yeah, this was so funny. I think it was after we finished recording last week, Sean, I sat down to play the game and got teleported out of the blue, because this game has some crazy fucking teleportation surprises, which is so funny. And I got teleported over to Caelid and the Scarlet Rot and all of that stuff. I mean, actually, I got teleported into the fucking cave where, like, and it's really hard to get out of because you're plopped in, like, the worst area to, like, actually mount a, like, strategic offense. It's so bad, but it's wonderful. And so I played around in there a lot. I did lots of random things. The thing that, like, I think the moment I fell in love with the game was as I was running around Caelid, there's a big tower that I saw off in the distance. And I forget what it's called now, but it's this big tall tower, and I rode over to it. It had many misadventures along the way, obviously, but I rode over to it, and the tower is a little off from the landmass, and in any other game, that would tell me it's part of the skybox and that it's inaccessible. But I went, well, what if? And I started jumping around with the horse, and I realized you can totally get into that tower, but it involves a big, massive horse jump puzzle, because the horse can double jump and you cannot. And it seems like you are breaking the game and fucking with it, but this is totally what Miyazaki and co. wanted you to do. Mm-hmm. And I finally get into the tower, and there are enemies in there that I am so I could not have possibly killed at my level. Like, there's no amount of get good with like what I had that I could have killed those things. So it was learning to run around them. The interior of this tower has a bunch of platforming puzzles, is the best I can say, like, to describe it. And finally got to like the boss of the tower, who I still have not been able to go back and beat. He was a little too rich for my blood. But but the simple process of, there's this thing in the distance I'm curious about. And this has gone through all 35 hours I've played with the game. it has never disappointed me. No, like,
Yeah.
curiosity I've ever had has gone unrewarded in some way. Even if sometimes it's, oh, well, this thing I was curious about, I really can't do yet. That's fine. I'll put a marker down and do it later, right? And that can be really satisfying. So that whole process, like, really made me fall in love with the game. Eventually, I did what you did, Sean. I journeyed back to Limgrave. I finished up a lot of stuff there. I spent a long time this week in the south. The south of Limgrave does not have like a big great rune, but it has lots of fun little quest lines and areas.
Are you talking about like the area beyond the bridge that's at the south?
Yes,
Of Limgrave?
like,
Okay, yeah, because
yeah,
I went across that bridge and met a lady there that was like, there's like a side quest or something. I was like, I have too many other things going on. I literally have a little journal that I have that
Yes, me too.
I keep by me anyways because I got in that habit when I started teaching. So I jotted down a note of like, come back here. There's like this lady gave me like a key or some shit and told me some shit, and I was like, I'll come back here later. So it's like I've got all kinds of crazy business going on, but so that's an area of the game I haven't really explored much.
Yeah, I'm forgetting what the south of the map is called right now, and I'm going to look it up. But let's see, it's the Weeping Peninsula is where I was basically, and I did all the stuff down there, and I did that actually on a tip from my brother who went down there and said there's a bunch of places to find the sacred tears, which is what you use to make your flasks better. So that's kind of why I headed down there, but I wound up staying down there and doing pretty much all the major stuff down there. There's great area. Really, if you want to just like the pure Elden Ring exploration experience, it's one of the best, like, I think, early areas because it's not like Caelid is crazy hard. That's like late game stuff, I feel like is supposed to be. The south is a little more manageable. And then I've done a bunch of other stuff, but I eventually did start heading west into the area we were just talking about with the Rhea Lucaria. Liurnia of the Lakes is such a great name for that area. And I have not by any means done that exhaustively. I've done the main Rhea Lucaria stuff. But I know the manor you were talking about because that's like next on my to-do list. I kind of like got the bonfire there, or the lost grace as they call it. I always just wind up using the souls terms.
It's bonfire. You're getting souls. I know that they're called runes, but it's too ingrained to think of it as anything else.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I've been. But like, overall, it's really hard to like. I thought about it, and I have not really had time to do it, of like journaling every day, basically like what was my fucking route through Elden Ring today, because it is such a crazy series of like, it's a common thing that open world games we'll talk about this with most open world games, that you get distracted along the way and find something cool, but it's just such a different like level of thing in Elden Ring because Sean, you talked about like being up an hour later every night. It's like the other night I had to get up early to work to go teach, and I had wrapped up a part in Elden Ring where I thought, okay, this is a good place to stop, and it's a responsible, and it's like 12:30 at night. That's good. That'll be good. And then I was like riding on my way to just like finish something, and I found a cave. And I'm like, that cave looks cool. And I went in that cave, and I came out 90 minutes later. And at 90 minutes later, I had almost enough souls to level up, so I might as well go to this spot that's good for grinding and get enough souls to fully level up, right? And that's how you go to bed at 3 a.m.
Yeah, because one of the things is that sometimes, you stumble on like a catacomb or something, and it's just a quick little, get in, get out. It's a 10-minute thing. You go, you fight a boss, you get a little like Ash of War or something, that's a little prize, and it's like, oh, that's cool. And then sometimes you stumble on those things, and like the presentation of it immediately is like almost identical, and then you keep going and you keep going. You're like, oh, this is a lot more than just a random catacomb or random tower or whatever. This is like, there's a whole deal down here. Yeah, you definitely could end up just stumbling on shit where you think it's going to be 10 to 15 minutes because you think you know what's going to be there. And even after playing God knows how much Elden Ring at this point, or the past 2 weeks, it surprises me constantly. Like, it has not stopped having the like every 10 minutes you're going, what the fuck is that? Like, that is still happening all the time. I had a big one yesterday in the Caelid Wastes where I saw what I thought was like, is that like a giant face? Not just a big face, not even just a giant face. Is that like a titanically colossal, gigantic face over there, or am I just seeing things that I got close? I'm like, no, that's just an insanely gigantic, colossal face. And then I started putting two and two together. I'm like, wait, where is this on the map? Where is this on? Have you discovered any of like the underground stuff, like the deep underground stuff?
Yeah, like the Seal for a Well area. Like,
yeah. So I started looking at the map and looking at where the gigantic face was, and I started looking at the other map and looking at where the gigantic face was, and I started putting two together, and I think I know what the gigantic, colossal, fucking evil giant face thing is. And it's like that, but that's just a constant experience. It's just this constant, like, what the fuck is this thing? What the fuck is that thing? Oh god, what is this monster? What is this horrifying thing I've run into? It's like, oh, is this going to be a whole area? I thought this was just a little thing. It's like, what is this standing in front of this tree? What the fuck are you? What is this person? What are you saying? Where are you pointing me to go? What the fuck is this weapon? Like, it's just constant surprises.
Yes.
And over like 30 plus hours of playing the game, 40 hours of playing the game, God knows how much time I've spent on it. But I don't think I've ever played a game that has like done this, of having so much like surprise and like so much kind of mystery and discovery to it that is still constantly fresh. And it is that thing that, as you say, Jonathan, like you think you're, or whatever, like you go to a cave, you're like, I'll just check this out, and then you end up in this 2 hours later, and you're like, what the fuck have I done? I have to get up in the morning. I have to do this stuff. But I can't stop playing Elden Ring.
Totally. The only other games that to me are comparable in that sense of like surprise is the broad genre of like the sort of Metroid style exploration games for me, of which I include Dark Souls, like and Metroid Prime and some of the 2D versions as well. And it's why that's like broadly my favorite genre of game, is I love the sort of like, lightly guided or unguided exploration games where it's all about you sort of navigating yourself and finding cool shit and piecing stuff together. That's my favorite kind of game. I love it. And what Elden Ring has done, I think Elden Ring is very much built on the bones of that kind of thing, but it has exploded it outwards in a million directions. And it's incredible. One influence on this game in interesting ways is Breath of the Wild, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've ever seen, Sean, or other people have seen, I don't know if it was a GWC talk or where it was, but it was the talk where the Breath of the Wild developers talked about how they designed the map to make people interested in exploring it. And it was a lot of like, they realized triangle shapes that like covered things, but as you moved, you would see the like, distances change that made you want to explore. I think very clearly they studied some of that stuff for Elden Ring, because Elden Ring is very, very good at laying out the map in such a way that you are constantly seeing things in the distance that you want to find, and on your way there, you find other things you want to find. It's really good at that. I think even better than Breath of the Wild was in kind of building that out. The difference is just the sheer density of the stuff you find along the way, and the verticality of it, and all of that. It's a really cool evolution of another game I really loved, and an interesting way. It's like, because this game obviously has influences from a lot of different areas, but all pulling it into such a very FromSoft, experience.
Yeah, for me, as someone who like respected Breath of the Wild but didn't particularly enjoy it, like Elden Ring, and I think I kind of talked about this at the very end of our discussion last week, is that Elden Ring is, I think, the game I had wished that Breath of the Wild was, in the sense of like playing Elden Ring. Honestly, I feel like I think of Ocarina of Time sometimes more than I even think of Dark Souls, in the sense of like that feeling of riding around my horse in an open world and not knowing what I'm going to discover is so like the kind of like, presiding memory of my time playing Ocarina of Time as a kid. And the sense of that, like every corner of that world was like so unique, and there's so many different weird monsters and weapons and tools and mysteries to uncover. And I think the thing that always bothered me with Breath of the Wild is that, with some notable exceptions, but in general, the only real things that game had to reward the player were shrines, Korok seeds, disposable weapons, which weren't really a reward because it was just basically picking up like shotgun shells in a first-person shooter, because it was just, you use it 10 times or whatever and it breaks, and then sometimes clothing, and that like never that never really interested me that much because I think the shrine problem of Breath of the Wild just so killed for me the fantasy of what was happening, because it was always what the answer was to what is on that mountaintop or what is behind this corner, what is going to be at this weird section of the map. Like 9 times out of 10, it was, here's a little weird hut that will load you into a different segmented area of the game where you solve a little puzzle and you get the exact same little orb that you can spend on stamina or health. And it just killed for me the fantasy of the exploration of that game, because I felt like 9 times out of 10, when I turned around a corner, I knew what I was going to find. And Elden Ring has all the same stuff I loved about the way the map is constructed visually and designed that Breath of the Wild had, which is stuff you're talking about, how they use silhouettes and the horizon so effectively, that there's always something on the horizon you're looking at, big things and small things. Like in Elden Ring, the little towers, or like not towers, like statues of like the like skeletal guys with their hand pointing a direction that you can go up to, and they'll kind of guide you towards a catacomb or something like that. Like those stand out on the horizon in this way that they catch your attention. So it's very good at using natural visual language in like contrast of negative space, using the horizon to guide you. And then also big notable landmarks, which are the different towers and castles that always orient you where you are physically on the map, which Breath of the Wild did very well with some of its major towns in the giant mountains, that you always knew without looking at the map screen where you were in the game world, because there were always very distinctive landmarks that oriented you at all times. And then the other thing that Breath of the Wild had that I thought was great that Elden Ring takes, and the way the game is built makes it way better for me, which is the map is just a literal map. It's just it's a topographical map, right? So you can look at the map and use that to guide you more purposefully if you really want to go through with a fine-tooth comb, because you can look at the topographical map and figure out, one, pathways around the world, and two, like notable locations where it's like there's a weird clearing here, or there's a big tree over here, or there's a strange geometric pattern on the map that indicates there's a village or something in this direction, and you can use that to guide you rather than it just being, you know, you go to a vendor and buy a Ubisoft style collectibles map or something that just pops every single interesting location on the in-game world map, and you just like use that to check off a checklist. All those different things of the landmarks, the horizon, and the topographical map guide you in your exploration. But whereas in Breath of the Wild, for me, I very rarely found something that was interesting when I turned the corner. In Elden Ring, as I said, I'm constantly being shocked and amazed at stuff I find, and not understanding what I find immediately, either in like gameplay senses with enemies and boss types, or in like a narrative sense of where I'm like, God, why is this enemy here? And doing that Dark Souls detective work of sort of like piecing together narratively what's happening, because there's basically always some sort of logic constructing where enemies are, why items are where they are. That kind of stuff is very meticulous in the way that Dark Souls games have always been. And that like narrative process is extremely rewarding. And then also the just in-game rewards as a player are oftentimes very unique and exciting and interesting, and you get different weapons that can change the way you play. Obviously you get experience that is extremely valuable because the game is challenging, and so it's like you constantly wanting to get more powerful. Getting new trinkets can totally change up the way you play the game. Getting golden seeds and getting better or more Estus flasks, or upgrading your Estus flasks, getting different spells, getting different summons, like getting different armor. There's so many different kinds of rewards that are unique and distinct that the game can present you, that you're constantly getting something and feeling rewarded for taking the effort to go out and explore every single nook and cranny you run into. And that, to me, as someone who was kind of disappointed in Breath of the Wild, is the thing that, like, I play Elden Ring that gives me that Ocarina of Time, like, distinct and singular open world experience that I've kind of always wanted, and almost no other games have ever been able to, like, to close to kind of like replicating that feeling for me.
Yeah, I think the like easiest elevator pitch I could give to someone on Elden Ring is it's Ocarina of Time plus Breath of the Wild plus Dark Souls. Like that is the closest, using existing games, I feel like I could come to the specific equation that this game is doing. Because you're right, and I even think it's down to like, you know, if you missed in Breath of the Wild the more like in-depth designed dungeons of Ocarina of Time and the other Zelda games in that lineage, which you kind of had with the giant beast, but it was a really different thing. Well, Elden Ring does that with like the legacy dungeons, the Stormveil Keep and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
And other places you will find randomly and realize this is this is going to take me a while. This is fun. Let's get down to business. I always love, that's always a moment I have in FromSoft games is oh, this is a thing. Well, let's crack my knuckles and get down to business on this. Let's go to work. But no, it's got all of that. And then obviously, it does have a lot of the stuff, we all love about Dark Souls. Although you were hinting at this just now, Sean, when you were talking about all the kinds of rewards you can get. I do think the more I play this game, the more I realize how different it is than Dark Souls. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing about that is this is, we've talked before about how there's kind of the FromSoft division of their sort of open RPGs in the Souls formula, and then they're more sort of focused action games where Bloodborne was kind of the first of that, and then Sekiro really goes all in on that. This is such an open game because I think it's really fundamental that you learn, and I think you're right about where they put Margit, the first boss you have, and that it's particularly hard, and the things they encourage you to they also put a big boss in the starting area that you cannot possibly beat right away, the big guy on the horseback, to force you to go explore, because every couple hours in Elden Ring, you're going to find something that could completely change up your playstyle. And that's very different than Souls games. I have not started to invest in magic yet, but I feel like that's the next step for me because I've found so much cool magic shit. I've never used magic in Souls games. I don't really entirely know even how it works, but there's so much cool stuff around that I feel like I want to. And even before then, all of the Ashes of War and summons, which are just work completely differently than summons in the other Souls games, made me put points into my mana bar, which is FP in this game, that I've never done in Souls games before. And I've even, kept an FP flask and stuff like that. And I have an Ash of War that I've been using for a while now. It's this Blood Strike one where you do this big wind up, and yes, that has I don't know if I could go back and play one of the Souls games without that because it's become so central to my playstyle. But there's a million things like that, and it's just stuff you'll find in the world unguided that gives you tools to totally change up your playstyle, and something you think seems impossible, you might be able to find certain puzzle pieces that you can put together for yourself that make a playstyle that will unlock this for you. We've talked a lot, Sean, about how all the Souls games, have lots of built-in stuff to make it quote-unquote easier for you if you want to play with it that way. Obviously, there's the famous stuff get on this bridge in Demon's Souls and shoot the dragon 1,000 times with an arrow. And that's one fun kind of, cheesing thing. But there have always been summons and little things you can do to kind of mitigate stuff. And I think Elden Ring really blows that open and is constantly encouraging you. I think Elden Ring more than any of the others would say, no, there's no such thing as cheesing in this game. Yeah. Anything you do is legitimate, unless you're hacking the game or something. It's all in there for you. Do with this toy box what you want to do, and the game is built to let you play with those toys, and that's what's so fun and rewarding about it.
Yeah, I think some of the requisite annual FromSoftware difficulty discourse that we unfortunately have to suffer all the time, and I'm very tired of seeing it. I think Elden Ring does make it interesting because the nature of it being an open world game means that there's such a broader range of what is difficult or isn't difficult in Elden Ring.
Yes.
Because I think one thing I love about it, and I think one thing that's very rich that it brings that changes the dynamic of Dark Souls, is that by expanding the sort of empty space between the very focused, very hard, intense, resource-driven exploration of a Souls, castle or dungeon area where you're constantly battling how many SS flasks do I have, how long is it till the next bonfire, can I get unlock a sort of side path or something that gets me back around so I can get back here faster, and that kind of the almost roguelite-esque experience of losing your souls and having to rebuild up progress again, all that kind of stuff is in the game. But the stuff in between that is so much bigger, and it's so much easier because you have a horse that is incredibly powerful and very effective, and little things of just being able to regenerate Estus flasks by killing groups of enemies out in the open world, that makes exploring not punishing at all, and instead very rewarding because you're not constantly having to stop at bonfires or something like that in order to survive. Those things make it so that just riding around in the open world and discovering things in most areas, there's a couple of areas that are more impressive, like the Scarlet Rot swamps and stuff like that are like sort of halfway between open world and more of like a kind of almost like a light dungeon or something. But in general, it just means that you can ride around and discover things and get into Dark Souls hijinks without having the like pressure of like the difficulty of the game on you at all times that frees it up. And it means that, like, for me, that then you become so much more powerful and so much more comfortable using a wider range of the abilities available to you, that I'm with you, Jonathan. Like, I'm someone who, I've talked about every time I've played a Dark Souls game, that I always end up in the same exact character build, which is using the Uchigatana as my main weapon, leveling up dexterity as, like, my main stat, obviously with, like, vitality and endurance, using a shield that blocks 100% physical damage, and then using that and rolling to kill enemies, and then having a bow, since that also scales with dexterity, as like my sort of like, backup option for tricky enemies or cheesing a scenario or stuff like that. And that's how I've always played these games. I never really paid attention much to magic. The Ashes of War concept is like an evolved and expanded version of a thing that Dark Souls 3 had. And Dark Souls 3, I almost never used it because I was like, I don't want to put points in FP, because any point I put there is a point I didn't put somewhere else that is more like efficient for my build. And I've totally blown up that build in a lot of that play style, that I'm now mostly dual wielding. I found a wakizashi, which is like a small, like kind of dagger version of a katana. And there are some weapons that when paired, you get special dual wielding attacks if you use L1 with them and you have both of them equipped. So like usually it's like two weapons of the same type will do it. So like two longswords will. This is like a special instance because they're two particular weapons that Uchigatana and Wakizashi will do that. And so I've been using that mostly, not using the shield as much. I've started doing Dragon Communion. So I ate a dragon heart, and I have a Dragon Communion seal that I also have in my left hand that I sometimes use to use dragon magics. I've used very liberally the Ashes of War, and I've used a bunch. I think the one I always come back to, because I think it's just the most fun, it's the coolest, is the Unsheath ability, because that's just super fucking fun, and it feels incredibly cool when you use it well. Because that's just that katana ability, and you're like Rurouni Kenshin or some shit. You sheath your sword and then do some like Bato Jutsu, you draw a sword, cut dude type action, and that's very good. I used the blood one for a while. But I just have like a much more expanded, broad character build. And once I got to a place where I was comfortable with my dexterity and stamina and vitality, I've mostly been putting points into mind, which is your mana, basically, your FP, and then faith, which is what levels up like faith type magics, which is what most of the dragon stuff is. There's also intellect magic, which is like sorceries, and that's like a different path that you could also pick. But I've been having a lot of fun using like a much fuller range of what the game has available to you, because it's much easier to level up, because it's like much easier to experiment and not feel like I'm wasting time or I'm going to get killed and lose a bunch of shit because I'm in the middle of a dungeon and I don't want to bother trying to figure out how this weapon works or that spell works because I need to be as efficient as possible. The game gives you so much more leeway to experiment, and it has so much more stuff in it, including the summons, which are so much fun. And I vastly prefer that to summoning an actual player, because it's like more narratively built into the game that I'm summoning like a pack of wolves or whatever I'm bringing in, and that like is very satisfying. All that stuff has changed the way I play a Dark Souls game completely. And that's something that I've really enjoyed, having come into the game basically intending to play it identically to Dark Souls, and then finding that like I don't need to, because the game is much more accommodating of you switching around and trying out different stuff.
Yeah, I'm actually writing notes on some of what you're saying, because I'm like, ooh, I need to try that, like, because I have found that Washigatana, or whatever it's called, the
Wakizashi.
Or Wakizashi, yeah, that I have found that, and I know that'll go. I was combining that with Uchigatana. They're two different things, but I can combine those two, and that sounds fun. And I have eaten one dragon heart, but I have not done anything with it yet. And I put a couple points into faith, and that would be very fun.
Yeah, my favorite spell I have, because it's the most edgelord shit possible, and it just is very effective, is I don't know where I found it, but I found a spell called the Blood Flame Blade, which is a faith spell that enchants your right-hand weapon, and basically, because what it does is it increases the bleeding effect your weapon does, So that's like a thing that the katana type weapons do, and a lot of like the curved swords in the game do, where if you build up enough of the bleeding status effect on an enemy, or it can happen to you, it does a huge burst of damage, which is particularly effective against bosses, because most normal enemies, they'll die before you get that on them. But the Blood Flame Blade increases that effect on your weapon, but it does it by setting the sword on fire with this like deep scarlet flame, and when you cut them it sets the enemy on fire, but it doesn't do any fire damage, it just causes them to bleed. And it's conceptually, it's the most like, I feel like my dude's arm, like right arm, should be wrapped in like bandages or something, and it's like, oh, I like Hiei and Yu Hakusho's like, the seal, the dragon that I've sealed inside of me that unleashes the blood flame blade. It's very fun playing like anime edgelord in Dark Souls, and
yes,
summoning dragon magics and using my blood flame blade to kill, weird giant monsters and shit. But I've been having so much fun playing around with all that stuff, and I feel like the way I play the game has changed so much over the course of the past week, and is constantly changing as I discover new things in a way that previous Souls games were so punishing, in that like you got so few upgrade materials, you got so precious few souls, that it was so hard to ever feel like you could experiment or change your build halfway through the game. And now like you're showered with different upgrade materials, particularly to at least get your weapon up to a decent point. If not necessarily like the top level, like ultimate upgraded versions. And that is something that like has just, I think, been a very welcome change that has made this game very rich and very different feeling to Dark Souls.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't think I've completely transformed my build as much as you have, Sean. But even for me, it's stuff like, I just have stopped using shields, and I'm just two-handing with my Uchigatana, and I am rolling around, and I've been using that, blood magic thing where it, like, does the big swipe, and that's been, because that can also take out, like, groups of enemies, which has been very helpful in some areas, and it's been really good on some bosses and stuff like that. It's a risk-reward thing, because it does a little bit of damage to you, but it's, like, very fun to keep an eye on. And then using summons. Like, summons in Dark Souls were sort of like an option of last resort for some bosses, where you would summon in either a player or something like diegetically in the world. It wasn't a normal part of your arsenal, right?
Yeah.
And now you like collect summons, and you don't just collect summons, you collect them for like cool narrative world reasons. My favorite thing I've done in this game so far was a very long series of events that I can't possibly describe all the steps of, that got me to the underground Siofra Well area and all of that, and eventually found this boss. There's a whole series of things you have to do, but it's the ancient spirit, or the what is it called, the ancestor spirit.
Yes,
which is I won't spoil it. It's a cool horse. It's my favorite boss in the game so far.
Yeah, it's like narratively that whole area is super. It felt super revelatory. That's where I think a lot of the world building of Elden Ring like really snapped into place for me. And some of the stuff it's doing, and yes, like that boss, the music, the design,
yes,
like because I didn't find that boss particularly hard, personally, because I probably found it later than you, because I found him pretty recently, so I was like very leveled up, so I like really fucked him up. But that felt awful, because I'm like, I don't want to really kill you like this. I know, really bad. But then he drops an ancestral follower as a spirit. And I have also been mainly using that because it felt very narratively like I feel like I went on this journey. I learned a lot about these people, and then like I'm have my ancestral follower with me, because we both like I'm taking him with this memory of like this experience I had that has like kind of changed some of the way I look at the world.
Yes. No, totally. And that is what I've done. The ancestor, like spirit, their follower, has been my main summon for most of the game. I've used other ones. I used, like last night when I was fighting Renala of the Moon in the academy, I used the wolves, because they kind of, which seem like a low level summon, but what they do is they mob and stagger her, which is helpful. So stuff like that. That was a little tip from my brother, because we were talking while I was playing that. But there's all sorts of stuff, and it's constantly, so like, even if I'm not using every summon, I just like having my little collection of summons. Like, oh, I fought this jellyfish dude, and I got this fucking cool jellyfish summon, and it's super sweet. I don't use it all the time, but I love that I've got it in my back pocket, It's stuff like that is super cool. And you've got all the talismans that you find, and those usually have some kind of like narrative or a narrative, accepting that means something a little different in FromSoft. Some like kind of world impact to you of like, I remember where I found this. It's very useful to my build. I'm going to put this on. You know, I feel like you're constantly like finding stuff like that. And so the kind of your fighting style and everything you do becomes kind of a reflection of where you've gone through the world and what you've found and what order you've done things in, because it's like shaped you into how you're playing it now, you know? Even down to stuff like the other side of that is I use because the samurai class starts with the big long bow, and I've used that so much, and bows in the other Souls games, I think, were what you were describing, Sean, is that's your cheese weapon of, okay, I'm going to sit here with 100 arrows and just kill this dragon slowly over the course of the next hour while I listen to a podcast, right?
Yeah. Or it's just like a utility thing of, oh, there's like an annoying flying enemy that it's just easier with the bow, or like you can use it to pull enemies by doing damage to them from a distance. It's just like an extra little thing that gives you a couple of additional options traditionally in Souls games.
And I've done it for all of that stuff in this game, but also I've learned ways to just do a boss fight with it.
Yeah.
Like, I fought a dragon the other day, and it wasn't I'm going to hide on this hill and hit the dragon from afar. It was, I'm up with the dragon fighting with my bow, and that's how I'm going to defeat it. And it felt kind of like how I was supposed to do it, because the sword wasn't doing a whole lot to it on its legs, which had like very scaly, like leathery soles that I couldn't really beat through. And I was like, this is cool as shit. I love this,
Yeah, I've been using the bow more liberally as well. Like, that there are some enemies in a couple of bosses where it has felt, as you say, like, not that the bow is like the designed way, because there are so many ways you could fight enemies, but especially if you don't have magic, there are enemy types that it feels like you really do need to have some sort of ranged option, or you're going to really struggle. And it's just more... It's very satisfying being able to use the bow more actively, which I think, like, it feels like they've adjusted some of the timing and stuff to make that slightly easier in this one. And some, like, the lock-on and stuff like that feels a little bit better, because the bow always felt extremely clunky to me to use for anything other than sitting in a spot, using the aim view and going pop, 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 and just standing there with it. It feels better to be able to roll, fire off an arrow, roll again, like that kind of stuff is much more doable.
Yes. Okay, I want to talk about the difficulty discourse for a second here, Sean. Because there might be listeners yelling at the podcast right now, Jonathan, weren't you just... Yeah, shut up. A couple of years ago, there is a podcast, like hundreds of episodes ago now, because
pre-Sekiro.
Pre-Sekiro, pre-me playing Dark Souls, like any of this, where I got in on the difficulty discourse and was complaining, like, I thought it sounded stupid to me, the way Souls fans talked about how there couldn't possibly be difficulty options. I want to say very clearly, for the record, I was wrong in what I said. I'm an adult, I can say that. I was wrong. Because the thing, and here's the thing, I know why I was wrong. If you are someone who's played a lot of video games but never touched the FromSoft world, I do think it can be weird the way people talk about the difficulty, because it's just a different kind of thing. Like, my point of comparison was I was talking about how Fire Emblem eventually split into having the classic and casual difficulties, and that was fine. And I was right. That was fine for Fire Emblem. The thing about Souls games is it literally would be impossible to implement a difficulty thing, and I think especially on Elden Ring, more than any of them, because it's all built into the game. The game really never, like, plops you down in front of something and says, here, with what you have directly right now, beat it right like this, There's always been things in Souls games to help ameliorate and help you learn and help you get stuff, and that is part of what makes them magical. You couldn't implement difficulty options, and especially in Elden Ring, because so much of what this game is going around and exploring, and the whole idea of difficulty is different. Like, earlier in this podcast, you talked about how when you got to Godric the Grafted, you just bodied him because you'd done a bunch of stuff. For me, he wasn't the hardest boss ever, but he was tough. He took me about an hour of tries to beat, and I had a lot of... I thought it was a great boss, but it was definitely challenging. So we had different experiences with it. How would you implement a difficulty slider into that? It's just not possible. It's not what this game is.
Yeah, because, like, similarly, like, instead of Godric the Grafted, the boss I really struggled on was, like, just a mini boss in a random dungeon that's in the Caelid West. Like, you might have fought him because he's, like, it's a gladiator guy that's in a dungeon that there's, like, a bunch of immolated corpses that can explode that are, like, in these cells. So if you've seen... I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes, I love that. That's one of my favorite caves. I love that.
Yeah, so I found that, like... 3 hours into the game, and I
Oh,
fought the
shit.
gladiator dude at the bottom of that thing, and like that took me like an hour plus to fight this gladiator guy, who again is not a like, I mean, he is a named boss, and that all bosses have names, but he's not like, he doesn't get a big cutscene, and like you don't get a
No.
great rune or anything. Like, he is a boss version. He's like one of like a couple of kind of templated bosses that they can use for some of those more sort of standard little dungeons and stuff. But because I was level 12, 15, something like that at that point, I was very early in the game. That was the one where I was like, no, I want to fight this guy. Particularly because I think he wasn't a main boss, I got very stubborn about it. Whereas like with Margit the Fellow, and I'm like, oh, I should go. I'm smart. I'm not going to be dumb and just run my head against this boss over and over again. I'm smart. I'm going to go off on adventures and get stronger and then come back, because I felt like that's what the game was trying to do. But then I was just like, this is just a gladiator man with a big axe. Like, I could fucking beat this guy. And then I fought him for like an hour. But like, if you fought that dude, I'm sure that was like for me, most bosses in those things are like, I barely remember, because it's just, oh yeah, and then I fought this weird shade, and I fought this pumpkin man, and then I fought this like big cat statue, and it was like a thing I died maybe once, or I didn't die at all and won that fight. But for me, because of the specific way in which I encountered him, that gladiator was like a hill I had to climb, I felt like, to kind of like fully put my like, you know, soul shoes on, or like get that back and like feel like I'm really doing it, when really I should have left and gotten stronger and come back. But I feel like most people are going to have totally different versions of that, of different things to encounter in different orders that they like stubbornly like fight against and overcome, and you get that experience. But everyone's going to have a different one of those because of the very open freeform way that Elden Ring is designed.
Yeah, you know, that boss for me was took me like maybe one or two just to learn the moves, and then I did it. The getting to him was harder than him, like, because there's a lot of like exploding enemies and shit, right?
Yeah.
No, and there's stuff all over the place like that, and yeah, it's just such a weird discussion, because I think if you're used to normal games, I hate to sound like an elitist here, but if you're used to like other kinds of games, it might sound alien, but it really is when you play. It's like, yeah, there's no, you know, even with something like Sekiro, which you and I both agree, hardest game we've ever beat, very hard game.
Yeah.
No one's going to deny that. But if you did something to like, one, I don't think you really could change that, because the game is so tightly designed. But if you did, it would change what Sekiro is, because Sekiro is the game version of being a martial arts character in a movie and learning to get past the mountain in front of you, right? It is, you know, there's going to be a lot of Demon Slayer games in the years to come, and none of them will simulate the feeling of Tanjiro actually overcoming one of his hills as well as like any boss in Sekiro does, right? You know?
Yeah. I tend to agree with you on this, that like the design of these games is so tight and exacting, and that it's just like, particularly for like the Souls ones, I just don't know how you would really implement a difficulty option setting and have it work well. Like, I just feel like it would end up breaking the game very easily, because the games aren't really hard. They're just different. And it's like, and I think it's one of the things that's hard to talk about it, and why people can come across as being like aggressive or elitist about it, because it's like, if you're not someone who's played a lot of the games, it is hard to explain why the process of failing and being frustrated in like dying over and over at this boss, like why that frustration is an inherent part of the experience. Not because like this is like the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life, but because like the game is designed for you to fail in specific ways, or for you to like struggle against the thing, fail multiple times, struggle against the same thing, learning from that failure, and then overcoming it in victory is the design process. So it's not about it being very hard. It's about the process of you struggling and then ultimately succeeding. And I don't know how you could tune it particularly well with like difficulty options, without making it too easy, because like most Souls games, like most of the stuff isn't actually that hard once you get a little bit into it. Most bosses you clear on a couple of tries. It's only the handful that really are the ones you struggle against. And if you put in a difficulty option that made it easier, I think most like basically competent players would steamroll through the game if like the numbers were more in your favor, because it's not nearly as hard as you think it is.
Right. And I've come to totally agree with this, Sean. And honestly, like, that's one of the areas where I think for both of us, Dark Souls 2 fell down, is something was off about that. And you and I both steamrolled through that game, and it's boring, right?
Yeah.
I there was a tweet from a person I followed today that I just wanted to read because I think it summarizes this very well. This is Sean, Shaun, not you, but the video essayist on YouTube. Just did a really good Harry Potter video essay that I highly recommend.
That. Yeah, that's
phenomenal stuff.
Very good. Very good, very haunting, but very good. Video
very
essay,
good, yeah. But he had a tweet this morning. He said, IMO, FromSoft games aren't that hard compared to other games. In terms of story progression, they're just designed around killing the player to teach them things, so if you go in with the mindset that dying equals failure, they'll seem harder than they are. It can take a while to click, coming from other games balanced around the player dying being the failure state, but there are levels in Mario games that give me much more trouble than most FromSoft bosses. And he also talked about, like, Horizon Forbidden West, if you respawn at a checkpoint or something, it's jarring, it breaks immersion, because Aloy didn't actually die there. Because of that, Horizon doesn't want you to do that 100 times, right? So it's a different kind of thing. But I think this is a very good way to describe it, because I totally agree with that. I hadn't actually thought of it that way. There are absolutely Mario games I've played that I think are harder than Dark Souls or Dark Souls 2 or Demon Souls or now Elden Ring, the ones I've played. Not Sekiro. Sekiro is the hardest game. But, like, with these other ones, like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, that is a harder game to finish than most Souls games, I think. It's light and colorful, and so we think of it differently. But this also goes to, like, what you and I have talked about, Sean, that I think there's a whole, like, level of, like, humor in these games that I think if you haven't played them, you don't really see, because it's not there on the box art, it's not there in the title. But yeah, I think the proof is in the pudding here of, like, Elden Ring would not be selling the numbers it's selling right now if it was a crazy hard edgelord game that, like, only crazy gamers who, like, talk on message boards could beat. Right?
Yeah, if it demanded the level of, like, technical mastery that I think, like, the discourse implies but is not actually there, that, like, it's always just it's the thing that's been so annoying about, like, it being one of, like, the cycles of discourse in video games, along with, like, our video games art and, like, all the kinds of nonsense questions that just, like, inevitably come up over and over and over again, is just because it feels misaligned, because it's, like, different groups of people talking about fundamentally different things. That, like, that example of, like, Mario games, or I very recently, just, like, as a palate cleanser between finishing Horizon 1 and replaying through that game and Elden Ring coming out, I very quickly replayed through Uncharted 1 and 2 because I eventually want to replay 4 and Lost Legacy because they put out those PS5 versions. So, like, right. And I can play through those games so fast, right? It's like a 6-hour campaign or whatever if you played them before. And in those games, like, I didn't die much because I've played them already, but in Uncharted, it's very frustrating when you die because it feels wrong. It feels like you're not supposed to die. It's like, it's a fundamental break in what's happening. And if you die too much in Uncharted, I think it, like, ruins the entire flow of the game. And kind of like when I first played the games on PS3, I didn't like them that much because I think I was playing the combat poorly because I was playing it like a cover shooter and less of an active game, which I think it is. It just doesn't teach you that particularly well. And I died a bunch in, like, key sections that then ruined the flow of it. And I kind of, like, didn't see why the games were like that much. And then when I played it again and kind of changed my style and was a lot better and didn't die nearly as much, the game was so much fun because it all flowed together well. And it's like, that's what 99% of games are designed with, that kind of philosophy in mind, particularly nowadays. Back in, like, the arcade years, like, it was a different thing and stuff like that. And, like, the lives-based thing that Mario games are traditionally based on is, like some of that stuff is a little bit different. But with most modern games, death is just, like, a thing that's really not supposed to happen to you. And it's more of a threat rather than it being, like, an inevitability. And in Souls games, it's inevitability that you have to learn from and struggle through and grow beyond. And it's like, it's an integral part of the whole cycle of the game. And so it's a thing that, I'm not saying that difficulty modes would be completely impossible, but they would be completely different in a Souls game were you to try to implement it than in something else. Like, I think you could have easier versions of the game or, like, more accessible versions that provided more options and stuff like that, but you'd have to rethink it. It's not the same thing as these enemies now have 50% as much health and you do 150% damage or whatever, like a difficulty mode in Uncharted or Halo does. For those kinds of games, that works well. For Dark Souls, I don't know what an easy mode would look like because it would be so much harder to implement and have it fit the design philosophy of the game.
This is why it's so crucial, and I think it's probably so crucial for Miyazaki as a designer, that everything in the world of Dark Souls is diegetic. Like the very act of respawning, which in some sense is the simplest video game mechanic because it's been there from the beginning, for Miyazaki and the FromSoft team, that has to not just be diegetic, but so built into the narrative that it's kind of what the games are about. And I think a lot of that is to help you ease into like what the game's like approach to death is, which isn't punishment, right? And this is there even in Sekiro and their more action-focused games, right? You know, it's really, really important that you understand in Sekiro that, like, you dying and going back to this spot isn't a rupture in the game's diegesis, right? Yeah. And I think there's a lot of stuff like that it's like, this is why it's so crucial for these games.
Yeah, that it's a natural flow state. It is how it's designed. It's like all of that is a part of what the game is. It's about this like apocalyptic cycle of like death and rebirth and struggling against failure and trying to overcome it. Like that's thematically, that's what all these games are about.
Yeah, but anyway, Elden Ring is just a fucking great game. We should probably like cap the conversation around here so we have time to talk about Batman. We will have plenty of time to talk about Elden Ring in the weeks to come. But
there's one thing I want to talk about quickly, just because I feel like I don't want to forget it, because it's the thing I had in the back of my hand to talk about on this week, which is related to some of the stuff of like discovering the underground, that one underground area. Although there are other ones also, but like that was like that's the main one I found, and kind of the story and what that like I think has clicked into place for me, like why the setting of Elden Ring is like doing a lot more for me than the more sort of like. I keep on wanting to use the word generic, which I feel like is the wrong term because Dark Souls fantasy is very particular. But it's like, but it's not historically or culturally specific. It's more just sort of like pulling in influences from other fantasy stuff, which is what Dark Souls has always been. Is here's some Lord of the Rings shit that we've made a little bit more fucked up. Here's some Berserk stuff, some of which they make less fucked up somehow because Berserk is very fucked up. But it's pulling in lots of that kind of reference point and creating its own version of dark fantasy through that. So the Dark Souls versions, like fantasy, isn't generic or standard in that way, but it's not historically or culturally rooted, really, or it's at least not consciously so. But with Elden Ring, we talked about a little bit last week that some of the stuff that feels like George R. R. Martin probably brought to the world building is it feeling much more culturally and historically specific and referential to real world cultures and real world histories that inform the fantasy world building. And that particularly, like I talked about, that there's like clearly some like Celtic influence in here, which is cool because it gives it a very different flavor. Particularly all the stuff with like the gods and the demigods is very kind of Celtic feeling because the Celtic gods are not they're not like this is the god of war and this is the god of love and this is the god of the harvest or whatever. It's less of that and more the gods are characters or they're like people that are more sort of full entities with like personalities and stuff that like have wars with each other and stuff like that. And so the depictions of gods and demigods and their effect on the world feels more kind of Celtic than usually we go to like Greco-Roman type stuff for that. And so all that is still there, but I think what really clicked for me in the stuff I've seen since over the past week is not just that it's got some like Celtic stuff or here's some Anglo-Saxon stuff over here. Like you talked about, Jonathan, there's like some Beowulf feeling stuff, which is very true, and that's Anglo-Saxon. But I think really what the game is doing is that it's pulling specifically from the like 8th, 9th century like syncretic period of like the British Isles, because it's kind of taking all of that stuff, the Anglo-Saxon, the Celtic stuff, some of like the Nordic stuff, like just generally like Germanic mythology and Celtic mythology and mixing it together. But like there's like this period of really rich and like interesting syncretism meaning like the fusion or combining of two different like cultures or belief systems that happened in that period, which is where like, you know, English and like English and British cultures and stuff like that in their modern version come from, where the English language comes from. And that's the syncretism between the pagan belief systems that were there in Western Europe and in the British Isles, which would be your Celtic system and your Germanic system, so like the Norse gods and stuff like that, or the more German versions of all that Norse stuff. And those were all these different pagan beliefs. And then you had the Judeo-Christian beliefs coming in through the Romans, right? And so then you have this period where all of the real myths and things that we now have that are recorded in history that come from those cultures are not originally directly from those cultures. They come to us through monks that were Christian monks that were there, and they recorded those because the Celts didn't have like technology to record their writing throughout history particularly effectively. And it's more how that stuff is all preserved, because all those myths were generally just like oral tales told orally and memorized by storytellers. The monks came in and they interacted and interfaced with those cultures and then wrote them down, right? And that's the source for stuff like Beowulf, is not the original version of the story. It is a version of that story told to us by a Christian monk. And so inevitably there are Christian elements that are sort of fused into those stories. And in Beowulf, there are a couple of places that are like very obvious, where the narrative voice changes very distinctly and introduces a more Judeo-Christian concept to sort of frame a very pagan, non-Judeo-Christian story, which is Beowulf, because, you know, I don't remember the part in the Bible where God made fucking dragons, or how Grendel's mother, the mother of monsters, existed in a framework with Satan, right? So that stuff clearly doesn't exist in a Judeo-Christian framework, but there are a couple passages that sort of like massage it into something that's a little bit more can exist alongside Christianity. And that's true of like all of those writings. Like basically all of the existing stuff that is Old English from that period all has like this distinct quality of it, where you are getting this story, but you can tell that there are things that are Christian that were grafted onto it. And in the reverse, there are things about Christianity that then get changed because they're pulling from different pagan stories. And so some of like the story of Jesus Christ is clearly changed or altered, or like the way it's perceived is inflected by some Egyptian myths and by the myth of Balder from Norse mythology, because there's a lot of like, you know, the sacrificial son and martyrdom and stuff like that is a very common theme in a lot of different belief systems. And so it's just this very interesting, culturally rich period. And I feel like Elden Ring is pulling that. And that is what it is that it's not just here is like some monsters and some gods that feel vaguely Celtic, or then here's like something that feels slightly more Anglo-Saxon. There is this like war at the game's heart between these two different versions of existence. One is this more Judeo-Christian type concept, which is the greater will, right? And like the fingers and all that stuff has this more kind of like Christian idea of this more like absent, vacant, inaccessible god or inaccessible entity. And then you have this like pagan belief system and multiple different kinds of pagan belief systems, some of which are more animistic, which is what the ancestral followers were. And that's where it all clicked for me, is that like, oh, the ancestral followers are like ancient Celts. They are druidic in their, and shamanistic in their religious practices and stuff like that. And their arrows, there's a great description if you read the description for the ancestral arrows, which is that like they all believed that spirits of small animals exist in the arrows, which is a very animistic kind of pagan belief. And so all that stuff, there's like this really rich world building, not just about these kind of mythologies and their creatures, but the way that these different cultures are like frictiously trying to coexist, and then this one version is trying to supplant it and has buried physically different older pagan systems underneath the earth. And then like there's this last struggle of these like pagan style demigods that you are part of like a mission to exterminate in some way. Like obviously I don't know where the story's ultimately going to go, but that, all of that is so fucking fascinating to me, and is something that like I've always enjoyed the narrative stylings of Dark Souls games and enjoyed engaging with it to a certain level, but I've never been someone that's like obsessed with it. Outside of like Bloodborne, I particularly liked because I like the Lovecraftian and Gothic horror stuff. But Dark Souls, Dark Fantasy, I didn't never watch like the 5-hour YouTube videos explaining everything. But this is one because it's hitting stuff that I'm more specifically interested in, and I think it's just like tying it to this more historical cultural era, and referencing and kind of commenting on that and these like traditions of syncretism and of supplanting older faith systems and older cultures with like newer ones is very interesting to me. And that's stuff that I've been having a lot of fun kind of piecing together, and I think informs the world building in this really rich way that gives it a very distinct flavor from other Souls stuff. And it must be the main thing that George R. R. Martin brought to the project, because it is so the kind of shit you see in Game of Thrones, and that like understanding of history is so strong. That like that is the thing that like I'm very glad that he was involved in this on some level, because I think it has made all of the more fantastical stuff so much richer by rooting it in something very concrete and interesting.
Yeah, totally. I think that's all true. I love that you talked about all of that. One of the things I thought about when you were saying all that is, one of the things George R. R. Martin has talked about, he is one who gives like these long flowing interviews where I actually love watching videos of Martin, because he just talks in an interesting way. And he's talked a lot about Lord of the Rings, and that obviously a huge influence on him. But he said the one thing he always thought Tolkien missed in his big mythology was religion. That, like, what would the faiths in this world be? And that was very important to him in developing Game of Thrones. And that's a huge part of that story, is like, what are the faiths and what are the religions that are warring? And I feel like that's one of the places where I see Martin's hand playing Elden Ring is exactly what you're talking about, is that religious systems exist, and you see how they are. Why they're important is because of how they're part of culture and space, and that's part of what's so cool and makes this world feel so alive.
Yeah, and it's all tied into like the different kinds of magics that exist in the world, and some of them are considered heretical by the Fingers. But like if you read some of the descriptions, because there's like a whole group of pyromancers that like you can find, some of them they're in like the Liurnia area, but they're from, if you read the item descriptions, they're from like somewhere way north. That I assume there's some other area of the map, because these people must be somewhere that I assume you're going to explore later. That scares me, that there's like this whole other section beyond the borders of the map that I haven't even fucking seen yet. But one thing that's interesting is you read some of those item descriptions for some of the pyromancy magic. It talks about how like at different points in history it's been considered heretical, and then at different points it's been non-heretical, right? That like sometimes when it's been useful for the like whatever the predominant, like the Fingers in the Greater Will and that kind of like Judeo-Christian framework, when it's been convenient they have allowed it, and when it's inconvenient they disallow it, which is very historically accurate to the way that Christianity and like most like predominant faiths have operated. There's a pragmatic quality to that, and there's a lot of that kind of stuff that this is, it's the meme about like the item descriptions in Dark Souls is like 110% true here. Like it's even better, and I'm very obsessively reading every single item I pick up. The first thing I do is I go read the description. I recommend, if you're someone who's playing it that's not doing that, you have to, because there's so much really good, rich ideas hidden away in all that little flavor text.
Wonderful. And we haven't even talked about how there's a whole fucking Knights of the Round Table room, and off of that is a room with just two giant severed fingers talking to you through a witch. This game is great.
Yeah, I love all the people in the Round Table. There's some, I don't know how much of that stuff you've done, but some of those side quests, like there's like a lot there in the way that like all of those people, well, not all of them, but most of them are these like treacherous, like very self-interested motherfuckers, and like seeing the way that there's like a lot of internal politics between the different figures at the Round Table, and then some of the people you see in the world, that I'm very excited to see, because for most of those I feel like I'm like at the midpoint for some of these longer kind of side quests. I'm very excited to see where that stuff goes, because it's all that's very interesting as well.
Yeah, I've done a lot of like writing in my little notebook that I also have next to me playing this game, of like, look out for this person because the person at the Round Table Hold said that. I have, one of the first things I did in the game, because it's around Stormhold, or the Stormvale area, is the woman you meet who's had all her retainers that went up to Stormvale Castle to be grafted, but then you find their bodies and you talk to her about it, and then she goes back to the keep with you. That whole thing I loved. I think that's a great
she
character.
becomes the spirit tuner and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's good stuff. All right. You want to move to some other good stuff and talk about The Batman?
Yes, let's move on to The Batman.
And normally I make fun of movies that distinguish from earlier titles by just adding the definite article or removing the definite article, the funniest one being Suicide Squad to The Suicide Squad, or in the reverse, The Fast and the Furious to Fast and Furious. Great stuff. I think The Batman very much earns this, because this is the first movie that feels like we've got the goddamn Batman on our screen.
Yes, no, this is out of the like 10 Batman movies that have been made. This is the Batman movie, right?
Yes.
Most of the Batman movies have not been that good, but even the ones that are good are not really Batman movies because Batman is barely in Batman Returns. That's a Catwoman movie that has Batman as a supporting character, which is not a bad thing. Like, that's a great movie, but it's just not really
Yes.
a Batman thing. And then obviously the '66 Batman movie is fucking amazing, but it's a farce, right? So it's a
Right.
very different kind of flavor. And then everything else is like middling to bad. And this is very good, and it is the Batman.
Yeah. So this is directed by Matt Reeves, who I've loved for a long time. I love that he's getting his moment in the sun too, because
Yeah.
Matt Reeves is such an interesting guy to me because he comes up with J.J. Abrams. They work on Felicity together. J.J. writes Felicity, Matt Reeves directs Felicity. They did a lot of stuff early on together. Matt Reeves' first feature like blockbuster was Cloverfield, which was a J.J. Abrams joint that he came and directed. But I think Reeves has always had amazing visual stylings and a lot of good story ideas. His remake of Let the Right One In, Let Me In is finally, now people are realizing that it's really good, and I'm glad because it's a really good movie. It very much was in the like cycle of like foreign movies being remade, and so I think people discounted it, and they shouldn't have. It's a very special little movie. And then his Apes movies obviously are some of the most kind of startling blockbusters of the 2000s, you know? Just like, these don't feel like anything else being made. And now he gets Batman, and here's how you know this is the first Batman movie made by actual Batman fans, is how many times in the first 20 minutes they say the words, year 2, second year, this is year 2, Batman, just to tell you, like, this is a year 2 story, guys, it's gonna be good. Because as you've said on the podcast before, Sean, the two best versions of Batman are year 2, when he's kind of established, but he's still a little unsure of himself, and the villains are all new, or well-established Batman with the Bat family, top of the world, all of that stuff. This is very much year 2 Batman, to the point that he's got a journal that just says year 2 on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the places I want to start here, because obviously, you know, we have done our big Batman movie podcasts, right? Where we did new podcasts of all the old Batman movies through to the Christopher Nolan ones. Eventually I would still like to finish that out and do the other ones that we didn't quite have time for, with Red Hood and the Bat
Snyder movies.
the Batfleck movies. But we we got through, and we have, for the Batfleck movies, we do have podcasts on them, just not the Zack Snyder version of Justice League. And I would, I mean, I don't really want to rewatch Batman v Superman, but I think it would be interesting to look at that movie because it's been long enough.
And I have a written review of Zack Snyder's Justice League you can go read. It was on my top 10 last year. You can read a lot of my thoughts on it. So
yeah, but with like the classic Batman movies, like I do want to be specific when we talk about like, why does this feel like it is actual Batman, and like how smart and effective it is at that. It's important to kind of look at like, what is it that those old movies are missing about the character. And I think it is just like, fundamentally there is a genre misalignment at play in almost every single Batman movie. Like, the only ones I think are like close are the Tim Burton ones. And it should be specific, we're talking about live action, right? Like, the animated movies are fucking great. They're their own thing. We're talking about like Hollywood live action movies. The Burton movies are like tonally close. They're like, the sets and all that stuff and the style of it is very like appropriate for the character. Like, those movies are the closest they've ever gotten. It's just like the central version of Batman, the movies aren't particularly interested in. And so you don't really actually get the narrative genre. You just get all the aesthetic trappings of the genre of noir that is like part of like the fundamental thing with Batman. But specifically Batman, when you're looking at genre and why those other movies all fucked up, because they're basically either just like generic superhero action movies, or they're basically James Bond spy movies that Christopher Nolan wanted to make, but he just got Batman instead, so he's like, well, fuck it, I'll just make a James Bond movie, slightly adjust it, and then put Batman characters in there. Which is what those movies generally feel like. Batman is a fantastical take on hard-boiled detective fiction. Like, that's what the character has always been. That is what, in most media, like in comic books, in cartoons, and in the video games, are all takeoffs of him being a fantastical hard-boiled detective. And it's something that's so frustrating that the live-action movie versions just have never even really attempted it, because, like, hard-boiled detective fiction is such a classic Hollywood thing, because that is like what film noir basically is, at its root, is broadly adaptations of hard-boiled detective novels from like the 30s and 40s, right? And I just think it's important to understand like the roots that Batman comes from. In 1939, Detective Comics was a comic book version of what was then like such a booming genre of pulp magazines and pulp heroes, where you have characters like Zorro and the Shadow, that are kind of pre-comic book superheroes, but so inform and are from the same cultural moment of the Great Depression, these very cheap forms of broadly distributed public media that are very populist and consumer focused. And one of like the really popular subgenres of that was detective fiction, and that's where you get, you know, the great authors of that genre of like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett all wrote short stories for these very cheaply sold anthology pulp magazines, that also would have characters like the Shadow, who is a detective character, but it's more fantastical and he gets into more fistfights and stuff like that. Less of the kind of more grounded, real detective-y feeling, like Private Eye stuff that a Dashiell Hammett story, like a Maltese Falcon or The Big Sleeps, that kind of stuff is. So that's where that all comes in. Comic books, eventually DC makes Batman in Detective Comics, who's just kind of a ripoff of a bunch of his characters in the comic book form. And then you start having around that time in movies, you have adaptations of a bunch of that Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett stuff, which forms like a whole branch of what we call film noir. And then, so that's its own whole rich tradition, and that is what the character comes from. It's what he's about. The comic books more or less continue on that trend, getting a little bit silly in the Silver Age because everything did with alien shit.
Right.
But the roots of the character are still effectively, he is a detective character. He is not from the Batman comic, he is from Detective Comics, and he was one character in the anthology Detective Comics series that just got very popular. And then I think what's interesting, and this is where like the Batman, this movie particularly comes in, is that in the 70s, in cinema is where you get your neo-noir movement, right? That's where you get like the French Connection, Chinatown, Dirty Harry, which Dirty Harry in particular is more in that kind of slightly more fantastical version. That's more Batman-y. But you have that, and you have this like really great resurgence of a lot of noir-styled storytelling and narrative structure and like perspective, but with the more 70s Hollywood like realism, kind of more grounded take, and it's more violent. And
this is like also where we should say you have the movie brat generation, where 70s American directors are the first generation that would have gone to film school. Mm-hmm. And so they're working with film history very actively in their movies, your De Palmas and Coppolas and all the guys doing this stuff. And Matt Reeves very much fits that profile too, I would say. And like, because I was talking to some friends about this, The Batman, this movie feels like the first Batman movie made by a film school person, because it very much, it's like playing with so many things that like we love to talk about in film school, like voyeurism and film history and all of this kind of stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, and you have this like incredible era of neo-noir movies from the 70s that then like re-injects itself back into the Batman DNA, because around like the late 70s is where Batman starts getting like more like that stylistically, and this is all pre the Frank Miller stuff. Like I think people slightly over-attribute Frank Miller for the course correction on Batman because it started before him with like Neil Adams. But you start having that. That's where like Jason Todd is, and then he gets killed. Like all that stuff starts happening in the late 70s. And then in the early 80s, you have Batman Year One, which is your Frank Miller driven like reboot of Batman across a wide reboot of characters in the DC continuity called The Crisis on Infinite Earths happens. And then they do sort of reboot those characters, do new versions of the origin stories that are more updated. And basically what Frank Miller and DC did with Batman Year One is, well, if original Batman was film noir era, like, you know, pulp detective, The Shadow, that kind of stuff, updated version of Batman is those same things, but neo-noir style. So it's that same concept, pulp, like, gravelly detective. He narrates to himself. It's all of, like, the narrative trappings and plot stylings of a noir thing, but in this more 70s era kind of grounded, more realistic take on the character, which has then become, like, the dominant form of Batman across most Batman media, at least like references the style of Batman Year One, even if it doesn't actually replicate any of like the actual plotting and things like that in the core narrative stuff, which, like, you know, Batman Begins looks like Batman Year One or is inspired by it, but doesn't actually have any of the plot type stuff that really has. And so then you have that with like the 70s stuff with Batman. And the thing with like The Batman, this movie, is that it is like the first one that says, okay, well, Batman is a hardboiled detective character. That is what he is. That is what his stories are. That's what the plots are. That is what the character is designed for, and is in his best media, always has been. we in movies have like this incredibly rich, brilliant historical genre that has multiple different phases, because then you also have like almost like neo-noir of the 2000s and like late 90s and stuff, with like Seven and stuff like that coming in, or Zodiac, which is a clear influence on this movie. There's like this rich vein of noir and neo-noir movies. Let's just make one of those and make Batman the main character of it. And it's
Yes.
like, that's what this movie does. And that's it. And it's like, none of the other Batman movies have ever done it. And it's the thing that's fucking insane when you see it done on screen, is how, like, obviously it's not easy to make a movie, but conceptually, it's the most straightforward thing you could possibly do with the character. Is, let's just take a neo-noir story and make Batman the main character. And that's what this whole movie is, and it's fucking great, because they finally just actually made a Batman story.
Yes. No, that's 100%. I mean, I knew we were in good hands when... Actually, I knew we were in good hands from the fucking logos, which just do WB, DC, title of the movie, get started. It does not have the, like, 45-minute fucking DC logo, or, like, the fucking long Marvel logo we get on everything now. It's just, like, old-style credits. We do WB, DC, The Batman, here's your movie. Thank you. But you have, first scene, Riddler does his crime. Second scene is your little hero introduction to Batman. Phenomenal. We'll talk about that in a second. And then it is Batman at the crime scene, going through, looking at clues, talking about stuff. And then the scene after that is he follows up on a lead from the scene he got before. And then after that, he follows up on another lead. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, we're not cutting to a B plot. We're not cutting to like 5 other characters who have their own stuff going on here. We're not doing like 7 different scenes with the villain establishing them. This is just... Like, we're barely getting Batman out of the cowl. This is just Batman going around doing Batman stuff, which to me and most Batman fans is detective stuff, and that's the whole movie, and it's fucking great.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you could take this script and, like, you could, like, heavily modify it. Obviously, you'd have to modify it to remove, like, all the Batman-specific elements, but if you took all the Batman-specific stuff out and made it, like, more generic characters... This could be just like fucking Jake from Chinatown or whoever, you know? Like, it could be any neo-noir style detective character, right? It could be your pair, like with Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt, and Seven could be investigating this. It could be fucking anybody, because it's the core thing is that noir style plotting of you have your hero gets introduced to mystery at the beginning of the story, and he gets handed some clues. He follows those clues to a couple of like key suspects and key locations where he gets some half-right information that he then follows around, follows some other leads, learns something revelatory about both himself and like the world at large, that there is like much more happening underneath the surface. This isn't just one crime. It is something that exposes a deep, like rotten systemic corruption to the whole thing. And that usually reflects in some significant way on either the main character or someone very close to him, like the femme fatale archetype, which would be like a Catwoman in this movie. Takes that information, goes back to the same places and characters he saw before, but now like more enlightened, and goes through that cycle again, and then ultimately has to sort of directly confront whatever like the fundamental corruption is, and not even really particularly succeed at defeating it, and come out of it like weary, battered, but wiser at the end, right? That is like the whole noir genre styling and structure and plotting. You know, we saw it in Mask of the Phantasm, if you want it in Batman and something else. And it's just like, it's such a fundamentally tight, plot-driven style cinematic plot that it's so gratifying to just see it happen. But now it's Batman doing it. And it's like, I just love those kinds of movies so much anyways. And it's one of the reasons why I like Batman comics, is because when Batman comics are good, they can do that extremely well. And it's just like, it's just so nice to see a Batman movie actually do it. And it's that thing where it feels dumb almost to be like so complimentary of it, because it's like, it seems like that basic part of it, of taking the plot arc of a noir movie and putting it with Batman, is so straightforward. But nobody's done it before on live action film. And so like actually seeing it done is great. But then this movie doesn't just do it. It does it fantastically.
Oh, totally. And, the thing is, though, watching it, I could kind of see why this is a lift, though, for Hollywood. Because this does, like, resolutely does not feel like any other comic book movie that's been made, or at least big, like, budget superhero movie. You know, this is WB's big release for the year, right?
Yeah.
The current weekend estimate is $130 million for box office. It's everyone's seeing it. It's a big movie, but it's this long, slow, like, this is a slow movie, and I love that. I like intentionally slow movies can be fucking great, and this is a slow movie that, like, you know, again, when I know we're in good hands is when that first scene where he's investigating is just a lot of Batman walking slowly with the sound of his boots high in the mix, and Michael Giacchino having these long, like, you know, chords in the music, just to sense that sense of elongation, and him studying the scene, and we're just kind of in the atmosphere. It's a lot of that. It's not an action movie. This just is not an action movie. It's got one big sequence you could call an action sequence, which is the car chase, and then there's some stuff at the end that is action-oriented, but is even then is a little different than what you would normally get for the climax of a superhero movie. And every other Batman movie has been an action movie to some degree. You know, most superhero movies are fundamentally action movies. That's not what this movie is. Yeah. And so, like, you know, this movie only gets made if they've done Batman so many times, they need to do something different. And if you have a filmmaker like Matt Reeves who has built up enough goodwill coming up in the industry and gotten enough money for the people making the movie that they will let him basically do whatever he wants, you know? And that's what we got here. And it's really cool to watch. This is, as comic book movies go, relatively uncompromised.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's true of his Planet of the Apes movies as well. The movie is so confident, right? Like, it has such a clear vision of what it wants to be, its take on the characters, its plot, like, its world, the characters that live in it. All that stuff is so extremely confident that there's just this incredibly firm hand on the wheel, I feel like, at all times with the movie, which is something you particularly need with a movie like this that has that slow burn style plotting to it, that you need this, like, kind of confidence that, like, all this, like, setup is, like, important and it's going to be paid off, and it's all, like, organically built throughout the entire thing. And I think you particularly feel that in the scene Batman walking around the room and, like, just being able to sit with it for as long as you do. Like, not even just comic book movies, most Hollywood movies would not be comfortable with how long that scene is, right? They would want that scene to be as short as possible and Batman to go punch someone in the face, you know, as quickly as possible to kind of get an earlier action scene into the movie. But this movie is happy with, let's, like, sit here, let's be here, let's sit with the characters, let's see all the information, let's soak up the tone, let's, like, look at Batman, look at people looking at Batman, and how much it just tells you about everything about the world and the people in it, by living in that moment rather than cutting to something else that's more exciting.
Well, you know, I was reading about this today. Apparently they did test a shorter version of the movie, and it tested more poorly than the longer version, and I 100% believe that, because the only way we'll talk about the ending. I like the last couple scenes, but I think there's a moment you could end it that would be stronger about, like, 7 minutes earlier. But other than that, there's no scenes in this movie you can cut. There's no, like, every scene builds on the scene before it. The only way you could make this movie shorter is to make the scenes, like, compress them, which you could do, but I think it would actually have the opposite effect of making the movie feel longer, because it would feel, like, weirdly ragged and incomplete and, like, jumping around more. Whereas this movie is just so on top of itself the whole time that you're just in it, you know? And that's a really, really crucial thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the tone of it is so thick and so compelling. And it's the thing you need with noir, right? Like, you need to sit there in the atmosphere, because I think one thing that's important to distinguish, like, film noir style detective stuff, or, like, the hard-boiled detective stuff, and it's very different than, like, an Agatha Christie whodunit or something, is that the point of a noir style detective story is not who is the villain. It's, like, it's about the characters uncovering, like, the roots of corruption and, like, being exposed to the reality and the dark reality of the world that they live in, that even if they seemed wizened and world weary at the beginning of the story, like, they were actually exposed to even be naive at that point, because everything is even worse than they thought it was. And confronting that face to face, and like the deliberateness with which that all of that has to be like scraped out and ripped off for you to see like the nasty beating core underneath the corruption and awfulness of whatever like crime or tragedy that is being investigated and how deep its roots go. That's the hard-boiled detective thing. That's the film noir thing. That's why like film noir always has to have like a very kind of conflicted feeling ending, because there's no way to actually rip out the heart of that corruption. You can only expose it and then do your best to sort of fight against it, but you never directly prevail, which is very different than a whodunit, which is just about the process of collecting, not just, but it's primarily the process of collecting clues and evidence, creating a mystery and a puzzle for the audience to try to solve, and then for the detective to be very impressive in putting all those pieces together in an interesting way and solving it and catching the killer. And then, wash your hands of it. It's like we caught the bad guy and we go home. And both of the genres are great on their own, but they're like different things. And so that's like, specifically, that's what this is it's not about Batman cleverly figuring out who the Riddler really is. That's not the point of the movie at all. It doesn't give a shit really about that. It's about him confronting the reality of the world that he's living in through his detective process of peeling back all the different layers that the corruption is hidden underneath.
And it's also very good at mixing all of that with the more heightened comic book reality that is what makes Batman fun.
Yeah.
So, this movie is not ashamed of the villain being called the Riddler. It is not, the Penguin is just the Penguin. Everyone knows this dude as the Penguin. He goes around and goes, "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" Like that kind of stuff. It's like, it's silly in those ways. It literally, the big visual metaphor of the end of the movie is a flood washing away what Gotham has been. It's big in that way that Batman is allowed to be, because he is a hard-boiled detective in a heightened comic book world. Which leads me to one conversation I want to have right off the bat, which is the stupidity of what I'm seeing online and in reviews of like, another dark, gritty Batman movie. This is so different than it's more in line with what Burton did, but like Burton's thing is very different in part because I agree with exactly what you said earlier, Sean. Burton's movies 100% nail the look of what this should be, and then the plots do nothing with that. Yeah. And that's what's kind of Batman Returns is its own weird thing, but Batman 89 is very disappointing on that level. But like comparing this to the Chris Nolan movies is such a stupid thing, because I think they're like, is The Batman a dark movie? Yes, visually and otherwise, because that's the kind of tradition it's pulling from. But it's much more like, to me, kind of like audience-friendly and lighter than like the fucking Chris Nolan movies, which are dark in what I would call a very self-serious way. Like, they are under the impression that they are making serious points about the real world in a setting that is the real world. Like, their big conceit is, what if Batman was just in actual Chicago today? And a lot of what I find offensive about those movies is its treatment of reality and its own self-seriousness. This movie has a lot to say about the world. It actually feels like a very current version of Batman in a lot of what they do. But it is, I would not call this a very self-serious movie. I think it's very winking in a lot of what it's doing, which is part of the fun of neo-noir when you do it right.
Yeah, that it is heightened, and it's got, it has both the kind of like sociological bent to it of it, like looking at corruption in society, but it also is very psychological, right? It's very concerned and interested with the interiority of Batman / Bruce Wayne and his experiences and his character arc. Which is always true of noir type stuff. It's like where the narration comes from, right? Is like you're in the head of the person who is the detective, which is, very different than like a whodunit type thing where typically you're in some sort of audience perspective character, obviously the famous one being Dr. Watson. But with this, you are with the detective as they're peeling all this out, and you're getting their raw thoughts and feelings and emotions presented to you either on the page or in a movie through narration often, that is communicating their psychological state. And often the world itself feels distorted by the nature of their psychological state. And so in like movies, usually like stylistically, the movie becomes more and more extreme as it goes on visually, and the way it's edited and the way it's shot and the sets and stuff like that can like almost transform. Like Seven is a good example of that, of it getting like very heightened in certain sequences and very almost theatrical with like how more oppressed and like intense the psychological state of the detectives become, or for that, like specifically the Brad Pitt character. Like that is very much where this movie is. So it's got this heightened theatrical, dramatic quality to it that is what you want from noir, and it's as basically as far away from the very cold, purely sociological, detached feeling tone of the Christopher Nolan stuff, because this has like a beating heart to it. It has a humanity to it. It's concerned about the main character and what he's feeling and what he's experiencing and the rest of the people in the city. And with that just comes this richer tonality. With it comes like a lot of humor, because I think this movie is super funny. I think particularly their take on Gordon is so good. And like like Jeffrey Wright just has the perfect line deliveries that are both like dramatically satisfying, but also very funny in their like movie cop way of him just saying, it's like, wait, so are you telling me that Falcone's the rat? Right? Like he gets all this like big cop dialogue that's very fun and almost like a bit wink wink at the camera. And you know, the Riddler has full-on actual riddles and stuff like that, and he just calls himself the Riddler. There's this like heightened humor to the whole world that is very Batman, right? Like the animated series is also a very funny show often because of how like heightened and ridiculous, and the Joker is funny and like all that kind of stuff can exist while also having the darker psychological storytelling as well, because those two things go hand in hand, the humor and the dark psychological storytelling, whereas the like detached, weird, like I'm going to look at my like city and all like the pawns in it kind of thing that feels like Nolan is as a director looking at the world of his film. Humor can't really exist in that framework almost at all.
Sexuality can't either.
Yes.
This movie is hot in several scenes.
Yes.
When you've got Zoe Kravitz and Robert Pattinson in their crazy costumes looking at each other, and Matt Reeves just slows the movie down for a minute to let you feel, hey, these two really want to fuck each other. Like,
Yes.
that cannot exist in a Chris Nolan movie. It's impossible. They're all Barbie and Ken dolls, you know? This movie is not as horny as Batman Returns, because that's impossible. No movie is as horny as Batman Returns. But it's, you know, compared to all other, like, 2000s era superhero movies, it's very horny.
Yeah, it's like, it's sexy, right? In that way. Like, it's intentionally sexy. Like, they understand that, like, Robert Pattinson is hot and trashy, and they, like, lean into it, right? And with, like, the makeup and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about how, you know, in this kind of movie, the style gets more heightened as you go along, and I was thinking of the scene in this movie where after he starts to learn about his parents, he, like, shoves the table aside and is using, like, spray paint to make this crazy fucking, you know, mystery conspiracy board in the least, like, convenient way for him to do that. It's a very stupid way to make a conspiracy board, but what you get is shirtless Robert Pattinson doing this tortured thing, and it's very... it like works stylistically so well. And then the following scene is him going and talking to Falcone, where his fucking hair is like inhumanly wet over his face, and he looks like Cesare the somnambulist from Dr. Caligari with like this like white face and all of this stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, these guys got the fucking assignment, and this is great.
Yes, yeah, that they lean into it really hard stylistically, which is what you want. And that's all the stuff that, like, you know, we talked about with the Christopher Nolan movies, that one of the things that makes it feel distinctly un-Batman compared to earlier Batman live-action movies was that, like, nothing of, like, the gothic trappings of Batman are there. Like, gothic meaning not, like, literally Gotham the city, although that's where the name comes from, but gothic in the, you know, the literature style and aesthetic from the 19th century. And this has that in spades. It's gothic as fuck. It's not just gothic, it's goth, right? You've got Robert Pattinson with, like, as you say, like, sometimes his hair is, like, clearly dyed black, like it's like darker than it is in other scenes to, like, lean into the aesthetic. And he's got the fucking black eye paint that is the eye paint that all Batman actors have worn to wear the Batman cowl. But this is like, he has it on in scenes with him out without the cowl on, because it's part of the whole, like, not just gothic but literal goth aesthetic that the movie's going for. And I so appreciate that, because you need the neon lights and the weird towers and like, I mean, you know, he doesn't live in a weird gothic mansion like outside of the city. He lives in a, like, weird gothic penthouse at the top of the city, which is in some ways even better. Like, I love that as like a little, like, a more modern take on the, like, Wayne Manor or whatever. But they retain the gothic aesthetic of it, because, you know, giant pointy spires is literally, in an architecture sense, what gothic is. And his whole weird fucking penthouse is just full of weird shit. That is it's as far away from utilitarian as you can get, which is what some of the like the set dressing in so much of the Nolan movies they really wanted to get to. And like The Dark Knight, a white stark room for all the Batman shit to be in, because nothing screams Batman more than let's stand in a room with white floors, white walls, and white ceilings, and one computer with Alfred at it in the middle, like you are in Dark Knight. Like, let's get rid of all the cool caves and the mansions and all the gothic shit, and let's go to a blank giant white space for Batman to be in. Is like the fucking stupidest piece of set dressing in the history of movies, and this movie's like as far away from that as you could be.
Well, and one of the things I love about this movie, and I praised it with the Burton films too, this is a studio backlot movie. This is and by that I mean it is all shot on sound stages and studio backlots. There's a couple of location shots. I don't think there are any actual full location scenes in this movie. And that is a good thing for Batman, because Batman is pulling on a legacy of movies that are studio backlot movies. Yeah. That's what noir is. That's what most neo-noir is like you have to construct it because it doesn't actually exist in the world. And while all of the like cityscape stuff in Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises can result in very pretty cinematography and stuff like that, it's very uninteresting as a setting for Batman, because literally none of the mise-en-scène in Dark Knight or Dark Knight Rises reflects Batman as a character or his psyche, because it's just Chicago and it's just Pittsburgh, and Batman doesn't live in Chicago or Pittsburgh, he lives in Gotham. And Gotham is a crazy gothic, like, hellscape. Burton did this particularly well, which led to the animated series doing it particularly well. And I think they've done a great job reinventing it for this film in both production design and, crucially, cinematography, which is, Jesus Christ, good in this movie. And it gets all of that, so you don't have Batman walking around actual Chicago. You have him on cool sets that look cool because they are fake as shit, and that's what you want, God damn it, right?
Yes, it's all very stylized, which is appropriate for the character, because of course it is a man dressed in a giant bat suit going around and beating people up and solving serial killer crimes by a dude who calls himself the Riddler. And it is, I think, like the moment I most knew we were in good hands was, he kind of like alluded to this earlier, but that like as soon as the Riddler comes on, like the first thing the character says in his like recorded message or whatever is like, "I'm the Riddler." I was like, yes. Oh, thank God. It's like you don't have to be like him avoiding it, and then like you have to create an entire scene where some random Gotham City cop is like, "Oh, are we going to chase down the Riddle Man today?" And like they have to like go through some weird like process by which like a news broadcast in the back of the screen is like, "Some strange serial killer using riddles has been called by some members of the populace the Riddler." And that's like the only time the character's name is said in the entire movie. He just says, "I'm the Riddler." Everyone calls him the Riddler. He leaves ridiculous riddles around for people all over the place. You have scenes that, like, if you just dialed it up, like, 2 notches, could just be a scene from one of the Adam West Batman movies of them trying to break down what the riddle is, and that the fact that it was L instead of La in Spanish and all that. Like, it's so ridiculous, and it's very funny, and it's very stylized, and it works 100% for what the movie is doing, because it's a fucking Batman movie.
Same with the Penguin. They identify him as, like, literally, Batman shows Commissioner Gordon a picture, and Gordon says, "That's the Penguin." And I'm just like, I love this movie. Yes. I fucking love this movie. It's the Penguin, and he talks in a ridiculous way, and he looks... It's not as silly as the Danny DeVito stuff, but, like, my brother made a funny comment the other day. He said he said he loved Colin Farrell as the Penguin, but low-key kind of thought it would be funny if they had just put Danny DeVito in it again. And the thing is, you could have done that. That's what's so great. One of the things I love about this movie, and why I'm excited for future movies like this, I can imagine most of the Batman Rogues Gallery in this world.
Yes.
There is no other live-action Batman I can say that about. Like, I could 100% imagine a Batman 2 where Robert Pattinson's Batman goes up against the Mr. Freeze from the animated series. Like that version of Freeze. I can imagine the Mad Hatter from the games being in this and it being actually really compelling. You know, I can imagine fucking Calendar Man. There are, like, actual Batman villains that they've never done that you could do in this world. And they've adjusted it. Like, they don't have Riddler in, like, you know, a comical green leotard, because that wouldn't really work. But it is still the Riddler, and that's what's so fun about it, you know?
Yes, yeah, 100%. And the only place where they don't do this, and I'm fine with it because I find it even funnier, is I love to death that Gordon doesn't call Batman Batman because it feels like he's embarrassed to, so he calls him
Yes.
Man in Chief, and I love it so much. Like because he doesn't know the guy's name, and it's like, and he's like some middle-aged cop. He doesn't want to go around and say, it's like, so Batman, what do you think of this? And I love that he's just like, come over here, Chief, take a look at this. It's the funniest shit in the world, and it's like low key. This is my favorite version of Gordon. Like, I love Gary Oldman in the Christopher Nolan movies, and he does a great job. But, like, the character they have written here is so much fun. And I think Jeffrey Wright just, like, pops so much as, like, old school Hollywood movie cop man, which is just what Gordon is, and, like, leaning into that role entirely. And him just, this guy's just like, what do you think of this, man? Come on. It's like, come on, man, get over here. It's the fucking best shit in the world.
Oh, this is easily the best movie version of Gordon because, like, for a million reasons, one of them being Jeffrey Wright is just legitimately my favorite actor who's done the part, and I could watch Jeffrey Wright do literally anything and I would find it interesting. He is one of my favorite actors. But, like, on top of that, I think their conceptualization of him, I love that he's an actual partner for Batman. That is something most of the movies miss. The Nolan movies do a relatively good version of Gordon, but one of the things they miss is, like, Gordon is never really on Batman's intellectual, like, level. And, you know, here, Gordon isn't necessarily the one always solving the riddles, frankly, because he's beleaguered and has other stuff to do, and so he leaves that to the crazy dude in the bat suit. But, like, you get a sense through the whole movie that when Batman and Gordon are on screen, Batman respects this guy.
Yes.
Batman's with him for a reason. They have a friendly chemistry. If it were a slightly different world, they might go out and have beers together. Like, and that is what I've always loved about Gordon in, like, the animated series, or the video games do this pretty well. Like, it's an easy dynamic to do with Gordon, and they really, really get it here. So you get a fully fleshed out character and a fully fleshed out relationship between him and Batman.
Yeah, like, I love he has a comment at a certain point in the movie where he says, it's like, we've known each other for 2 years and I don't even know your name. And there's, like, this feeling of, like, that Gordon wants to be, like, he's, like, almost, like, pushing the boundaries. He's like, come on, man, like, let's have a beer together. Like, let's be friends, not just colleagues. Like, it's like he's trying to, like, push that relationship to the next level. But unfortunately, he's, like, trying to do that with, like, a 20-year-old you know, fucking insane somnambulist, basically. Fucking the dude, you know, Batman doesn't sleep at all in this movie, and Robert Pattinson's performance, like, reflects that. It's a very intentional choice. It's like, you know, Gordon's not going to get the reciprocation from that relationship, but I love that he's, like, kind of pushing at it. Because, I mean, it is, like, a whole kind of buddy cop dynamic, basically, they have going on between Batman and Gordon in this very, like, kind of twisted, weird Batman way. And it's just the most fun, interesting version of that character we've gotten in any of the movies. And it's one of the best parts. Every scene that he and Batman are together and their dialogue with each other is so funny. But like, and not funny in like, oh, this is ridiculous. Just funny in this is such a lived-in performance in two like real people, and it's funny in the way that of like actual people who are very different but like respect each other, bouncing off of each other in a way that is like funny in real life.
I'm thinking of, like, the moment when the bat signal goes up because Catwoman has done it, but they both arrive at the same time, and they're like, I thought you put it on. You didn't put it on? And they're like, okay, what's going on here?
Oh, God, and their relationship is so good. Yeah, like, that is one of the best moments of them both pulling up and being like, I thought you didn't? No, it's like, you didn't? Oh, that's weird.
And it's not because, like, either character is ever making jokes. This isn't a Marvel movie where, like, someone has come in and, like, done the joke pass on the script.
Yeah, there are no
and
quips.
It's very awkward. Yeah. But it's funny because it's lived in, is as you were saying, right?
Yeah.
And this is heightened and weird.
Yeah, because the way that scene is written is like Batman and Gordon ran each other at the fucking grocery store, you know?
Yes, yes.
Like, they neither of them really expected to see each other right there. Like, oh, wow, wow, okay. Cool to see you here, man.
Okay, so Jeffrey Wright, we love him. Let's talk about some of the other performances. Yeah. Robert Pattinson, we were both very excited. We thought it was perfect casting. Turns out, yes, perfect casting. He is easily the best live-action Batman.
Oh, God,
if you're arguing for anyone else, you're an idiot. I will accept your love for Michael Keaton, because Michael Keaton deserves all the love in the world, but Michael Keaton didn't get to play as fully formed a character as this. Robert Pattinson in this movie is A+, perfect, mwah, I love it.
Yes, it is a great performance that the movie cares about, you know? Like, it's the main difference with, like, the Michael Keaton stuff. Is like, Michael Keaton is fucking great in Batman Returns. And if they had made a movie that was about that character, I think he could have turned in like an absolutely legendary performance, like as good as any of like the classic superhero movie performances. But he just didn't get really the opportunity with the material. But like this is both Robert Pattinson, who is an incredibly talented actor, pulling in a great performance. You know, he's not like slumming it on a superhero movie. He really clearly cares about the material, cares about the character, is enthusiastic and passionate about doing it. And then a movie giving him really, really great material, with a full character arc and lots of great, interesting scenes, and just a very thorough, like lived in take in the character. And it's like the thing that I think Robert Pattinson most brings to the role is just like, I think you fully believe that this person exists, right? Like
Yes.
you believe him, you believe his psychology, you understand why he is doing the things he's doing, why he is driven to be Batman, but you also understand critically that like it's all kind of fucked up and wrong, that he shouldn't be doing this, that he's killing himself, that he's not helping the city really. He's destroying himself, spending all of his energy in the wrong direction, which is what the movie is about and what his character arc is. And I think that's fantastic. And then his portrayal brings all of that to life, and it brings this really rich character arc for an early Batman to life with just this fully lived in, believable performance.
Totally. And, I think there was a lot of talk when he took this part, because Pattinson took a very sharp left turn after Twilight. Kristen Stewart did the same thing of, let's go the indie route and find every interesting director I can work with and just do weird. He did like 2 David Cronenberg movies, all this kind of weird stuff. He's been in a Claire Denis movie. He's done all this great stuff. He did Safdie Brothers, all sorts of interesting films. And it's like, is Batman kind of like, what's coming back to Hollywood like this? What's he doing it for? And the thing is, I think it like slots into the arc of his career very logically, because this is a higher profile movie of which he's taking a bigger paycheck home. But it feels like the kind of stuff he's interested in, which is, This is an interesting character who's weird and like iconographic. I think Pattinson is someone who, as an actor, has a good sense of his own like body and iconography, and filmmakers often use him for that purpose, like David Cronenberg very much did. And I think this movie, does that a lot, and you can feel the enthusiasm for it, and it is heightened to the point of silliness, which is what Batman is, and because this is the first Batman movie that is willing to call Batman on his bullshit, which is what all good Batman stories do, because Batman is a fucking weirdo. He gets to play a really great, interesting version of the character who grows and changes and has, dynamic character moments. It's fantastic. And this I just love. He looks more like a vampire in this movie than he ever did in Twilight. He's more afraid of the sunlight in this movie. There's a scene where the sun is out and he puts on sunglasses because he's so unused to the light that he can't be in it. That doesn't happen in Twilight. He just sparkles. I fucking love that he's more of a vampire in this than in the 5 vampire movies he did.
Yeah, I love this take on a young Bruce Wayne who is so... It's not like this is original, but it's something we've never really seen the movies do, because the closest they got was a little bit with Christian Bale, but then they abandoned it completely because he's like... Christian Bale's so suave and charming. But, most Batman movies, we just get the very straightforward, like, he is very good at pretending to be this, like, playboy billionaire character to sort of throw people off the scent of him being Batman and to get some clue or something by attending some gala affair. And that's like a plot point in basically every single Hollywood Batman movie. He goes to some sort of like weird basketball or party or some shit, and then something goes down with the villain being there to just get a Bruce Wayne scene in there. And that's a totally legitimate thing, right? That's like the roots of the character. The Shadow is like literally that exact same thing. Zorro is literally that exact same thing. So it's like it's fair enough to have that. But I like the younger Bruce Wayne who is nowhere near like elegant or like graceful enough to be able to do this, to like actually be a normal person, is something he doesn't know how to be yet. I believe that eventually, in like 10 years, this Bruce Wayne would eventually learn how to play both sides of this equation very effectively, like the Batman you see in Batman the Animated Series, which is, the best version of take on that, where you get, I think, the full richness of both sides of it and how the space in between the two kind of personas he lives. But here, he does not know what being Bruce Wayne is, and he just doesn't care. And he's just dead. He's just this totally dead fucking person who never sleeps. It's like, he can't sleep. He has nightmares when he tries to. Most times he goes out. Most nights he just goes out as Batman. He keeps like a little like journal to both remember all the things he's done, because he can't remember it all because he is fucking sleep deprivation, and like almost as like a dream journal or some shit to like try to process what's happening to him. And I think that that's such a great take on the character, and that I feel like it's like one of the core things that Robert Pattinson's performance runs with, is this idea that he's kind of not all there. He's out of it, particularly when he's not in the Batman suit and he's doing Batman shit. He's just like sort of lost. And anytime he's in normal Bruce Wayne stuff, and when he like wears normal person clothes for the first time, not the like baggy black t-shirt and pants, which is what he wears the first time you see him, which is the most goth shit ever. Yes. But he like wears a suit when he goes to that memorial service or whatever, and it's just like, oh god, you look like you're going to fucking die any second, with how pale and just exhausted and frail he looks, and how uncomfortable he looks as Bruce Wayne, because it's just, he doesn't know how to be a normal person, because he's invested himself so much in his own trauma that he can't be a human being anymore. And I think that that's such a like really rich, compelling take on the character for a young version of Bruce Wayne. And like that's the kind of thing that I think any like other performer would not really be able to do to this caliber. It's the thing that I think like it feels like the thing that Robert Pattinson most sunk his teeth into. That I've just never seen another live action Batman do anything close to something like that.
I love the little moment before the memorial where, the costuming and makeup in this movie is so fucking good at telling a story. Like, that suit doesn't fit him anymore. He's, like, emaciated. It doesn't look good on him. And then also he doesn't have cufflinks because he's like, I couldn't find them. And it's like, because he probably doesn't know where anything is anymore, right? Because he's so checked out. And so Alfred gives him his cufflinks. And that's a really nice little moment, but it's also like, he is so sleepwalking through the world. Alfred knows, like, this is not a good idea for you to go out to this memorial. And, of course, he's bumbling around and barely knows how to talk to anyone, He gets, like, one good line in on Falcone there. But you also sort of see this mirror of, like, Falcone, John Turturro, is really good at the opposite of that, of being, like, this, like, slick gangster out in public with his public face. And Bruce Wayne just hasn't mastered that at all, And it's such a fun performance. And then... yeah, we knew this from the trailers and stuff, but I fucking love every Batman has had the eyeshadow on, but it is magic eyeshadow that always disappears when they take the cowl off in every movie. Like, literally in Batman Returns, there's the scene he rips it off in front of Catwoman at the end, and the eyeshadow's there when the cowl is on, and when he rips it off, it's gone, because they never want to have the sexy Bruce Wayne with big mascara all over his eyes. Nope. Robert Pattinson's got that mascara on in every fucking scene other than the memorial service, and it is there all over the place. His hair is always messy. He's pale as shit. He just looks like a mess. He's goth. We're listening to Nirvana in the movie. It's great. I fucking love the mood of the whole thing around the character.
Yeah, it's just that kind of very complete take on the character, which is very gratifying. And then you have the other half of it, which is the Batman half, and this is where we get what is easily, far and away, the best live-action Batman costume ever. Like, it's
easily.
Both in terms of just its visual presence on screen, and then also it's like, we did get this with Batfleck also, but, it's good to have this with, like, a good movie, which is him being mobile, He can turn his head. He can, like, jump around. He can punch people and kick people and do cool martial arts stuff. He can be Batman, and he's not like big, stompy, weird man who has to rotate his entire body to look 2 degrees to the left and then rotate his entire body to look 2 degrees to the right to see if there's, like, a dog that's going to fucking bite his ankle or some shit. Like, it's this full, like, physical performance that Pattinson's able to give while in the costume that... almost, again, with the exception of Batfleck, like no other live-action Batman, with Batfleck and Adam West in a very different way, no other live-action Batman has ever been able to give an actual, like, physical performance as Batman, because it's just been stand here wearing this costume and do some very light choreography that is about the best you can manage wearing this ridiculous, cumbersome suit. And so...
Well, because in The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, I actually think the mobility is there in the suit, But Nolan is so inept as a director
Sure,
of
yeah.
action that you just never get it. And the suit that they redesigned so he can move his neck and everything, it's just generic military armor with little, like, horns on the top. He does not look like Batman in Dark Knight or Dark Knight Rises at all. This is an actual, like, looks like it's out of a comic book Batman suit, but he can move and give a full performance in it. The cowl in this movie looks so fucking good. And Robert Pattinson has the most perfect chin line for it.
Yes.
It's amazing. He gets to be Batman, and I can't believe it took this many movies, but we fucking got it. Thank Christ.
Yeah, it's just his performance as Batman is perfect. He doesn't do a big voice, right? He talks a little bit more raspy, but like slightly, than when he's like trying to vaguely talk to John Turturro and wearing a suit. He's not trying to be very intimidating, but other than that, like, it's just him talking, right? And it's a thing where it reflects even more poorly on all those choices of the Christopher Nolan movies. Would you just see this, like, you didn't have to do any of that shit. Like, you don't have to make him big and clunky and stompy. You don't have to make him growl at people. Like, you can just do the thing that, like, all other Batman media has done forever, which is make him like a ninja man and have him talk to people, and it's fine. Like, I always will be sad that we never could get any sort of like Christian Bale Batman across a Superman character that he's trying to have a conversation with, and like him trying to be world's finest buds with Superman while growling at him the entire time. It's like you couldn't imagine it. This version of Batman, as you say, I can imagine him with any other character from the DC Comics universe, because it's just Batman and he just can talk to people and he's just that character. He's not some like absurd caricature that can't exist outside of like the barest frames of the shot you've shot with him.
Yes, exactly. And I think the mobility is key, because when he jumps into action, and there are so many good shots, like this movie more than any other Batman movie has a real feeling for Batman's iconography as a character and has fun with that. But like, I'm thinking in particular, I think my favorite moment of this might be at the end when he comes in through the roof of Gotham Square Garden and just... he's jumping around like an actual ninja on these guys, using his gadgets, moving very fast, very, like, particular in the strikes he's making. He's not, like, all elbows like in the Nolan movies or something stupid. It's just is like, yeah, this feels like a comic book version of Batman in a movie theater, and it's so cool. And it's so much fun. And yeah, and as you said, because of the voice and the costume and everything, he gets to give a full performance. And that's important because he's in the cowl way more than he's out of it in this movie. Which, I think would have been unthinkable for like certain past versions of Batman. Like, you couldn't have done that in the Tim Burton movies because he can barely move in that thing,
Yeah, but it's that thing that's like, it's one of the many elements that makes this feel like a proper Batman movie, because to be like perfectly honest, in most other Batman media, like the comic books and the cartoons and stuff, he's not Bruce Wayne very much. Like, the most he's Bruce Wayne is when he's in the Batcave at the computer talking to Alfred. Other than that, like, you will occasionally get the scene of him at some sort of like, big dinner party for some rich fucker where like Man-Bat attacks or something, but usually he's just Batman doing Batman stuff. And when he's not in the Batman costume, he's like lifted the cowl off of his head while he's sitting at the computer with like a cup of hot coffee, trying to figure out like what riddle's been set for him or whatever. And that's very much the style this movie goes for, is that most of the time in the movie, he's 100% in Batman mode, and that's really kind of like both what you want and what the character I think is most built for in most of his stories.
Well, it's another reason why Pattinson is a uniquely good actor for this, because what that means is that a lot of this movie is watching Batman watch other people and think. It's watching him think through problems, oftentimes non-verbally, and you have to have an actor who has an interesting enough approach to small, minute details of movement, of where his eye line is, all of that kind of stuff. And I think Pattinson 100% delivers. It's a very nuanced performance going on under this crazy, superhero costume. And he's just very compelling to watch him watch other people,
Yeah, that's what you need for Batman. That's what you need for any noir like protagonist, because that's like what they do most of the time. That's like because with like noir stuff, it doesn't even have to be detective. Like one of the best noir movies ever made is fucking Citizen Kane. There's no
Oh
murder
yeah.
or whatever, but it's like that's like Joseph Cotton's whole performance in that movie is just like he's someone that it's fun to watch, listen to people talk, and look at people as they're talking to him, because like he lives this sort of like reporter character, and the inquisitiveness and the curiosity of the character is so lived through that performance. And it's like the same kind of thing you get here with Robert Pattinson.
Yeah. One other thing two other things I want to praise about the costume. One, I love the fucking Batarang logo that he's got, and he pulls it out and it's a knife. Yes, please, thank you. Very good. He doesn't use that until late in the movie when he's going back into the Riddler's house. And when I realized what they were doing, I'm like, oh shit. And then he does use it in the final action scene, and it's very cool. Love that. The sound design in this movie is outstanding. And one of the things I love is how many sounds the Batsuit has with it. There are so many big, meaty sound effects of like him moving his body and like the leather and metal flexing. Or, I mean, goddamn, the sound of his like boots walking around. There's a whole sonic atmosphere to the Batman costume that is another thing I think other versions have missed. It's as much about how it sounds in that space. And this is something animation you actually don't normally get because it's just not something you're going to think about. But in a live action movie, it's so cool how the sound interacts with the mise en scène. And it's one of the things I love about this movie.
Yeah, I mean, there's just this like very powerful feeling to Batman whenever he's on screen, which is what you want, right? You need... Like he consumes every single like image in like scene that he occupies, because that's the whole point of the character, right? That's like what Bruce Wayne is trying to create and become, is this symbolic entity that is undefeatable, unstoppable. And so all of the things about the costume and the way he carries himself is meant to like emphasize that. And I think every time you see him, it feels like it's a very conscious choice to make him feel like self-consciously powerful. Not just that he is purely powerful, but you, the audience, sees he is putting that power on, and he is performing it and acting it, and people physically respond to it around him. Even when it's like the other cops and stuff, which is like some of the best stuff in the whole movie, is just seeing like cops that like know that Batman's not going to attack them, but them just physically responding to Batman's presence. And the sound is a big part of that. And I think the best sound work is his fucking boots. And there's like, I swear, there's just a little bit of a cowboy jingle jangle that they put in there that you get, because there's lots of just great sequences of him slowly walking towards someone. And it's a bit like, they did the same thing in the fucking Mandalorian. That's like, you just got to get like that jingle of spurs, even when it makes no sense. He's not wearing fucking spurs, but it's such a distinctive, very cinematic sound effect that conveys like masculinity and strength and like the potential of sudden violence is all contained in this little jingle sound effect that goes along with that walk. And it's just there a little bit, and then it's all like the fucking pebbles and dirt and gravel scraping on the bottom of that boot. And there's such a fixation on it that has that great Batman quality of where, from like the villain's perspective, Batman is effectively fucking, Jason or whatever. He's a slasher movie villain, because he's just slowly walking towards you. You can't shoot him. You can't stop him. He is going to get you and fuck you up and get what he needs from you, because he's Batman. He is vengeance. He is fear itself. The whole shebang. And like the only way that his shtick works is if you fully commit to this thing of where he almost feels supernatural with the way he is so unstoppable, outside of, like big climactic confrontations with the main villain or whatever, where it needs to be a formidable thing. But random goons, it's like they're nothing to Batman, and they convey that perfectly.
And even the villains. Like, I love that this movie does not at any point contrive a punching match between him and the Riddler.
Yeah.
The Riddler specifically says to him, "I'm weak, I couldn't do any of this." because none of other than Bane in some incarnations, there really aren't interesting Batman villains who he throws a punch at. Like, because that's not who Batman is, and the villains are interesting because of other ways they come around at Batman, you know? Scarecrow never throws a punch at Batman. Scarecrow gets under his skin, you know, that kind of thing. And they get that with all the villains in this movie. Penguin is never going to stand up to Batman physically, and so it's very funny when Batman finally has Penguin in his grasp, you know? That kind of thing. Yeah. All of that is fucking great. We've talked about Batman and we've talked about Gordon. They got both of those right. Alfred, not in this movie a ton, but he's played by Andy Serkis, and I loved him. Yeah. Great Alfred.
Yes, yeah. It's a more sort of like utilitarian use of the character, right? Like he's not in it a lot, but particularly the scene in the hospital where, which is a great scene that like introduces some of like the core sort of uncertainty around like the history and like the past, which is another sort of key noir element. It's like you're never really sure what has happened or like where the roots of some of this stuff comes from, but it's like the one time that Bruce really connects with another person and like opens up to them. I think that scene in particular was really well done.
Andy Serkis is obviously like very out of left field casting, but I think it's so perfect because we've had a ton of Alfreds, and Alfred is someone every version of Batman gets right. Like Batman 89, and then those movies where you have that version of Alfred, Michael Gough. He's wonderful. We love that Alfred. Alfred in the Nolan movies is Michael Caine. He's a lot of people's favorite parts of those movies. Alfred in the Snyder films is Jeremy Irons. He's really good, particularly in the Snyder cut of Justice League. He's fantastic. But like, so how are you gonna get one up on Michael Caine and Jeremy Irons as Alfred? The answer is you have to zig when they expect you to zag a little bit. And so Andy Serkis is a little, you know, he is not like a classic British theater actor in the same way, you know? So he doesn't feel like the butler. In fact, they very clearly denote him here. He was probably their bodyguard in the past. They mention him being in the circus, which is the John Le Carré invented term for the MI6. So like he has a different kind of background, and he just brings a very different energy while having that requisite warmth that I think is the key thing for Alfred to get. Obviously, Matt Reeves and Andy Serkis have this long working relationship because of the Apes films, but I think it's just very inspired casting, and I think that chemistry they have is really special and really interesting.
Yeah, it's a really good take on the character, and luckily, if they want to like do a big like new thing and they like have Alfred become fucking Man-Bat or something, you've got the world's premiere, you know, motion capture actor right there. They're just poised to have something horrible happen to Alfred and have him turn into a monster, and you could realize it very easily with Andy Serkis playing him.
Has that happened in like New 52 or something?
No, that has probably happened. I've never read a comic where that's happened. I'm sure that Alfred has been turned into a monster at some point. It is completely inevitable. I'm sure it's also not canon, but it is technically canon because it happened in Earth fucking 27 or some shit. But no, that's just me thinking it would be very funny if, like, because the comment I was going to say originally was like, and it's just cool to see Andy Serkis in a movie where he just gets to be Andy Serkis, because you don't see that often. You know, he's been in some stuff like he's Claw in Black Panther and stuff. But then I had the thought of, but wouldn't it be hilarious if the reason why they cast him is because they want him to just become a monster at some point? So they're like, we got to plant that seed early.
That would be fun. But no, I like having Andy Serkis just be Andy Serkis, and he's wonderful. Yeah. Love him as a person, as an actor. He's great. I want to hit some of the bigger characters in a little bit, but let's hit some of the other just small, like, Batman standbys. The Penguin.
Yeah.
Colin Farrell. I love what they do with the Penguin in this movie. I love that it is a ridiculous big makeup prosthetics performance where Colin Farrell is just completely unrecognizable. Yeah. I love the way they do the nose on the prosthesis, where when he's just standing there, it doesn't look that weird until he scrunches his face and suddenly it's the penguin nose. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of little details like that. I love that he talks like he's like fucking Dustin Hoffman in Midnight Cowboy. I'm walking here, that kind of thing. I think it is a hilarious, great take on the character, and I would be very happy to see more Penguin in the future.
Yeah, it's a very good take on the character, and just like the way he fits into the plot, right? It's the whole like you have to have this like ancillary like criminal element that is like not really a part of like the main thing you're investigating, but comes up in sort of like the sphere of it. That's like such a trope in noir stuff, and having that character be the Penguin, you know, it's a very Batman thing. Like it's one of the things why Batman typically has a lot of stories where you have a number of different villains in them, but the villains don't like play the primary role is a pretty typical structure for a Batman story, because he'll hit up Penguin or Black Mask or whoever while he's really chasing Joker or Ra's al Ghul or some other character, right? Like Riddler is honestly a character that gets used in that capacity a lot, and so it's like fun to see them see like that utility of Batman's really rich, varied rogues gallery, like that came about from necessity of the kinds of stories you tell with Batman that aren't really things you do with other superhero characters. You know, like Spider-Man's not hitting up Doc Ock when he's trying to take out Green Goblin. Like those stories don't work that way. But bringing that dynamic and putting it in here, very smart. And yeah, the whole performance, the whole take on the character, it's ridiculous in the best way possible. And I just love that they cast Colin Farrell and that you would never be able to tell. Like nobody, if you even if you put the fucking picture next to them, it's like, here's Colin Farrell without it, here's it with the makeup on, you would never be able to tell that it's him. It's such completely transformative makeup.
Yeah, but it's exactly the kind of thing that works for this movie. I love that with the whole El Rata versus La Rata thing, it's the Penguin who knows that. Yeah. He's like, "That's the worst Spanish I ever heard." He's La Rata, La. Yeah. And I was howling with laughter. Yeah, that is so great.
What, no habla español? It's the funniest shit. Yes. And them doing the old, the classic gag of leaving him like cuffed up or whatever as they drive away. It's just... Oh,
and then he waddles like a penguin because they did his feet too. It's great.
Oh, it's the fucking... this movie's so fun. Yeah.
Yeah, love that. While we're talking about the Penguin, Sean, we might as well. The fucking Batmobile chase with him.
Oh,
God. When he starts revving up the Batmobile and they reveal it like it's a fucking monster in a movie, I knew we were in for something good. And that's the best action sequence Batman's been in a movie, right? Like, yeah. Jesus Christ, it's so good.
Yeah, it's such a, for my taste, it's a much more interesting version of a car chase than, like, the more elaborate spectacle of a Christopher Nolan one. Like, there's just it's got that, like, really just, like, gritty, grimy fucking quality to it that is so satisfying. This is, like, the sound design. They went above and beyond, like, the Call of Duty for this whole sequence. And this is... for me, far and away, easily, with no contest, the best version of the Batmobile. Like, the Batmobile is a thing I've never been, like, in love with Batman. Like, it's there for, like, a very good utilitarian purpose, but I've just never, like, the weird supercar that's just, like, utterly ridiculous has never really appealed to me fully. But I love the idea that it's this, like, American muscle car he's found, that looks like that it's not even like a new muscle car. Like, I don't know exactly what it is, but it looks like it's from something from like the fucking 70s he's found. And he souped it the fuck up. He put a giant fuck off engine on the back of it that kind of looks like a bat. And that, makes a sound that will like deafen everybody within a 2-mile radius of the goddamn thing when he turns it on. And it's just this like viciously powerful old American muscle car that he would be able to drive on the streets. I think that's the thing that's always seemed dumb about the Batmobile. It's just like, it's the least inconspicuous thing you could ever have is here's this like fucking 10-foot long supercar that has like, fucking missile pods and all that shit on it. Like, the Batmobile never looks like a car. It looks like a weird space future car thing. Here, it's like, it doesn't look like a car that any random person would have. But you've seen cars like this. You've seen someone bought an old classic car and modified it and put a big engine on it. Like, it's a thing, it's rare, but it's never unheard of or unseen. So if Batman needed to drive around at night, he could drive in that car and people probably wouldn't know it was Batman. They just think it would be some, like, rich jerk-off who, wants to wake up the entire neighborhood when he goes out to the clubs. And that's it. And that dynamic, I think, is, like, the only time I've really been fully sold on the Batmobile. Also because then it's just involved in this sick-ass car chase, and it jumps through the big fireball, and it's way better because it looks like a car that fucking Bullet would drive in Bullet, It's just... Yes. It's so sick.
It's so sick. When he revs it up for the first time, in the theater I saw this on Thursday night, which has a really good sound system, it literally shook the theater. Like, I was like 7 rows back, and it literally in my seat shook, and I was like, we're in for something, and we are. The way Giacchino scores that scene, all the sound design. You don't even see Batman that much in it. That's what's so good about it, is that it's the Penguin running away, and Batman is just unstoppable. And Penguin even, does this whole thing where he blows up 7 cars, and Batman just flies through it, and then you get my favorite shot in the movie. I have 2 favorite shots. One of them is this, where it's upside down from the Penguin's perspective, and Batman walking through the fire. Phenomenal. My other favorite is the shot when he's coming to get Falcone, and it's dark, and it's just lit by the bullet fire as he's fighting. Those are my 2 favorite shots in the movie.
Yeah. I think in particular, I'm with you on both of those. And the upside down shot was the one they used in that like incredible trailer for the movie where like the logo comes in over that, which I almost like missed. There was a part of me that's like, they should just, even though it's like halfway through the movie, it's been going for like over an hour at this point. They've already had the logo. They still should just have the logo coming because it's so cool. But that sequence is obviously even better in the movie because it's so long, right? It's just like Penguin is just there trapped under this car looking upside down, and the fact that the whole shot, as you said, because it's the whole sequence is filmed basically this way, is generally from Penguin's POV. You're with him as he's running away, looking back at Batman, trying to avoid him, and so the whole shot being framed from the perspective that Penguin would be seeing him, which is upside down, is great. And that's where you get all the like slow walking and the jingle of the fucking invisible spurs that Batman wears, that I guess he got them from Wonder Woman, who she has her invisible airplane, gave him his invisible spurs so he could sound cool while he walks. And then I love like his like slow ducking into frame and like twisting his head so that it's not even like upside down. Now Batman's like sideways on the frame in like this weird way. It's just it's a very good example of the thing I said earlier, that as neo-noir type or noir type stuff goes on, typically the like filmic and visual space it exists in becomes twisted and distorted and hyper real. That's a very good example of doing that as things become more ridiculous. Just the cinematic space everything exists in becomes weird and unfamiliar. It actually reminds me of very specifically, I'm thinking of this because I ordered some physical versions of these comics. I only had the digital ones for a long time. Some of the Scott Snyder Batman run that are very clear influence on this. This is like the New 52 stuff where the Court of Owls comes from. And the Court of Owls comics do this exact thing where Batman in that is drugged, and at a certain point the images start becoming askew such that you have to twist the book physically to read it until eventually you're holding the book upside down to read it. I'm betting that this is a little bit of a cue off of that sequence and turning it into like a cinematic version of that.
They do. We'll have a fuller conversation with the cinematography later, but they do a lot of really creative stuff with that, where, like, this movie really, really uses, like, anamorphic widescreen and anamorphic lenses, the way it kind of blurs the edges. It really heightens that to like focus you in different ways. It does a lot of stuff with like low depth of field and like blurred backgrounds and all sorts of things and even the whole color scheme of the movie, which is basically deep dark blacks and like deep vivid reds, feels very much like comic book coloring choices to me. There's a lot of frames in this that you could, like that scene I was talking about where he's coming down the hallway and it's just lit by the bullet fire. You could take some of those individual images, put some of the black images there, put them on a page, and it would look like a comic book page, and it would be amazing.
Yeah, you definitely like can see it as like 2 pages with like 3x3 panels. Like it very much is spaced like a comic book sequence. That would be much easier to do. Like, it's a very comic book idea because that would be like a very like, not easy because drawing is hard, but like compared to filming it and having to light it and all the exactness you would need to do that to actually like film that sequence, it's much easier to draw the way that would work. And so I agree with you that scene has a very comic book style and aesthetic and like pacing to it, just executed in live action.
Yeah, and obviously, maybe you can tell us later in the plot. This is pulling off of a really wide array of Batman source material, like much more directly than most comic book movies ever do. Like, they often pull on characters, but like there's lots of direct lifts, right?
Yeah, there's direct lifts from Batman Year One. There's direct lifts from Year Zero and some of the other Scott Snyder stuff. There's direct lifts from this is like one where like they always say they're inspired by A Long Halloween, which is like one of the great classic Batman graphic novels. Jeff Loeb writing Tim Saleh's art, which is fucking classic. And like, if you look up the Wikipedias for all of these Batman movies, they basically always say, yeah, and The Long Halloween was an inspiration. And none of the movies are anything like The Long Halloween. This is actually like The Long Halloween.
Yes.
It actually, the first, it starts on Halloween, and then the like elaborate like nature of the unfoldingness of the plot. That's a good example of a story where Batman visits multiple villains while he's investigating this one case. Like, this is actually pulling elements from the way that story is constructed, not just saying, oh, The Long Halloween is a cool sounding story that is a very famous Batman one, so we'll say, yeah, I read Long Halloween and it influenced the scripting process.
Yeah, no, this one feels like they poured over some fucking comics, and that's cool. All right, other characters we should talk about. Zoë Kravitz as Catwoman. Yeah. I think she's fantastic. It's a great take on the character. It honestly almost feels like a direct refutation of The Dark Knight Rises, because she's being used in a fairly similar space to what Nolan did, but competently, which that being the key word here. And it's just a great version of the character in the much more modern, like, Catwoman as kind of a sidekick version, you know?
Yeah, and her being, like, the thing that the character, when she became an anti-hero type, is, like, the reason why they did that is for her to be the full femme fatale for Batman, right? And it's like, it's one of the reasons why it's one of the only sort of romantic things you can do with Batman as Catwoman, because it plays into the noir stuff. Yeah, and that's one of the places where you see a lot of, like, it's a very Batman Year One take on the character. She's like either directly a sex worker or like sex worker adjacent. I think it's like a little bit ambiguous whether or not she like is actually a sex worker or she just works at a waitress where there are sex workers. Or at the bar, the Iceberg Lounge, where there are sex workers there, where she is like directly a sex worker in Year One, but she's like in that space and like having her thematically be someone who like comes from an impoverished and unprivileged background, which is like a big important part of the more modern take on the character, and that's one of the places where like really fully committing to that portrayal is a lot more compelling than whatever the fuck they're trying to do with Dark Knight Rises. I don't know what they're trying to do with Dark Knight Rises in that character. But she serves as a very powerful contrast to Batman and his privileged position. And they even heighten it by making her black, right? So, like, which typically she's white, but there have been other black Catwomen. Like, notably, the Harley Quinn cartoon did that as well. I think it's a good take on the character that heightens, like, the different kinds of contrasts she has with Batman.
Yeah, and Eartha Kitt is black too, right? Yeah, from this very different version of the character. Yes. But we have had Catwoman is a character who is portrayed more diversely in various media. Mm-hmm. But no, I mean, yeah, I think Kravitz is great. I really love how the entire relationship is drawn and written in this movie, where sometimes, and Dark Knight Rises really suffers from this, the Batman-Catwoman thing can be super patriarchal. Like, It's, Catwoman, you're bad for being liberal and poor, and I'm rich, and you should listen to me. That's what The Dark Knight Rises is. It's very, very patriarchal, and it's bad, and it doesn't work. In this movie, when Batman is patriarchal, he gets called on his bullshit. Yeah. Like, when he's, like, a little judgy about where she works, she calls him on it and tells her story, and then Robert Pattinson's Batman says the words, "I'm sorry," which, like, what a revelation, because we've just had the 3 Nolan movies where he is never wrong, and now he says, "I'm sorry." It's great. And when they do, and this is key for me, this is the first live-action Batman that really engages with the idea that he doesn't kill people. Mm-hmm. The Tim Burton movies, obviously, he kills whoever he wants. Same with Batfleck. In the Nolan movies, he nominally doesn't do it, but he finds a lot of creative outs for killing them anyway, and it's all bullshit. In this movie, he doesn't kill people, and when he tells Catwoman not to, they have arranged the plot in such a way that it is not him lecturing her. It is him being her friend and romantic interest, saying, "For your sake, I know you don't actually want to do this." Because they've contrived a situation where the person she wants to kill, Falcone, very likely killed his parents, and so he has skin in this game too. He also probably deep down wants to fucking hurt this guy. And so when he says don't kill him, it comes from a place of pain for him too. And I love the line he has there when he takes the gun from him. He says, "You've been through enough. Like, don't do this to yourself. You know, you don't have to go down that road with him." And I just, like, because the thing about Batman not killing people is it's such an actually rich vein for exploration if you want to do it, either for him being a hypocrite or for him being someone who this is the thing he won't do to hurt himself. And I like how this movie treats it so much, because it leads to this really beautiful emotional moment where, no, this is not Batman talking down to Catwoman. This is him saying, like, I've been here and I feel for you, and I don't want you to hurt anymore because I care about you. And it's a huge part of his character arc in this movie. It's great. It's essential.
Yeah, it comes from, like, a place of deep empathy, which is really critical. Because then it also comes from, like, a major running theme in the movie, which is, like, you know, you're, like, the complicated relationship between children and their parents, right? And that, like, a big part of that is them, you know, doing the thing that has become more common. I know that the Telltale Batman series did it, but of, like, making the Waynes not these, like, completely perfect, untarnished, uncompromisable bastions of hope and goodness that have been killed, but instead that they were people that were powerful people in the society, and thus were, to some extent, and we don't know how much because we get two different versions of the story, but they were corrupt and they did bad things, and that, like, they hurt people, and they failed as well, and they used their power in ways that hurt and killed people, and Batman has to confront that, and then also, you know, Carmine Falcone is Catwoman's father in this version, and so there's, like, that as well. Like, I think a part of Batman's empathy there is also, like, even if he's a scumbag, like, you don't kill your dad, you know. It's like, it's gonna hurt you too much someday, even if it feels justified now. Like, this will come back on you in some way, and so him being there, to, like, expressing that empathy is, like, the first, like, real Batman thing he does, of, like, the aspirational version of Batman that is the other end of the, like, Bat family version, where he is, like, this icon of empathy, where, like, instead of him being a symbol of fear, he is someone that is in many ways the most empathetic of all of the, like, iconic DC heroes, because he's the one who has been through the most and is most driven out of compassion and empathy to help other people. And that's the more aspirational version of Batman. And you see that his journey in this movie is him working towards that version of it, and less of the young, angry, vengeful version of the character. And that's, like, this is that kind of key moment where he begins that shift. And then the end of the movie is where he completes it by extending it not just to Catwoman, but to everybody, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really key scene that, as you say, is taking this very important part of the character in most interpretations of him, which is that he has a hard and fast rule: he will not kill people, and making it a very, like, real, empathetic, lived thing that comes from a reason that drives him and that has positive impact on the world. And, like, that's just, like, what I want from the character. Like, I think that's, like, at the end of the day, even with all the noir stuff, Batman is still a superhero, and that's the part of him that makes him a superhero. And it's nice to, like, see that be represented in what is still a very adult, complex, like, gritty, violent movie.
We also get, off of all of this, a very funny moment where he's with Gordon and they're going into the orphanage, and he says, "No guns," and Gordon says, "Yeah, it's your shit, man, not mine." Yeah. I fucking love that. I love Gordon's like, "Dude, you're the guy in a bat suit. All I have is this. Let me have the gun." Yeah. Jesus Christ.
Yes, that is another classic Gordon and Batman buddy cop moment. It's just, every Gordon line is perfect, and Jeffrey Wright, every fucking delivery is like that. It's just so,
yes.
It's very good.
Okay. So they nailed Catwoman. They've done all these characters great. What about our boy, the serial killer, the Riddler, played by Paul Dano, who clearly cast here because of his classic work in There Will Be Blood. Uh-huh. It is a very, very There Will Be Blood performance. I really love this take on the Riddler. What about you?
Yeah, it's what you want with your, like, sort of modern dark version of the Riddler, where he's like a weird Zodiac killer type serial killer. It's just, you know, the Riddler is one of those villains that I've always thought is fucking great. I've loved Riddler forever. And, you know, we got a very good comic version of Riddler with Frank Gorshin in the 60s version, which is fucking great and iconic. And then we suffered through Jim Carrey and Batman Forever. Very tragically, we watched that movie for the podcast. And then now it's like, this is a proper, like, dark take, like, more modern take on the Riddler. Complete with riddles, like, right, he's that character. They're not hiding from it. They're not trying to make him something else. He does the whole shtick. It's just, it turns out that, like, that it can be both funny and horrifying to have this person be writing out these games and creating these games and these riddles and puzzles for people to solve while he is killing them, and also having them be ridiculous. Like some of the puzzles are just like a complete absurd, like, oh, the funniest being the like URL is the most Adam West Batman, like,
yes,
oh, like it's like law, like whatever, it's like he used L instead of law, would he make that kind of mistake? It's like URL, but no, URL. Like, you could just hear Adam West fucking deliver that line and then going to computer and like he's got a fucking bat laptop there or some shit, and they like type in the fucking URL address, right? So it's like they get all the ridiculous parts of the riddles and just play it totally straight, and that's what you want from the Riddler. Like, it's just exactly, to me, like the platonic ideal of a live action version of the character.
Yes, I've seen some criticism of this movie with people saying, the riddles weren't that hard. It didn't make Batman seem like a great detective. They were stupid. I'm like, that's the point, guys. Like, the Riddler's riddles are never, like, the best riddles in the world. And especially for, like, he's a fucking crazy guy killing people. Like, there's a whole different purpose to it here. And the whole El La Rata Alada thing is fucking great and funny and very comic booky. You have so many great moments of Jeffrey Wright having to say that. I love when he's got the cops. He's like, "You're the stool pigeon, right?" They get the term stool pigeon in this movie. I mean, come on.
It's a rat with wings. What's a rat with wings? Pigeon? A stool pigeon? Penguins have wings. That's probably the best fucking Gordon line in the whole movie. It's him going, "Wow, penguins have wings too." It's so funny.
But yeah, so I love all of that. But he's also legitimately scary in this movie, and I love that. Like, he is a terrifying villain. They pull a little bit from The Dark Knight here in the, like, videos that he makes and stuff, but they're more in the vein of, like, Saw than they are what happens in, like, The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
And there's all of the live streaming element and the internet side of this. And I do think where they go with him in the final act, when you finally have Paul Dano out of the costume and everything, is really smart. I love the idea of when we get to the end. So for the whole movie, and I've seen this movie twice, by the way, and the second time really helped clarify this for me. Batman is very clearly scared that the Riddler has figured out Bruce Wayne is Batman, and he's anticipating that everything's going to fall apart. It's why he has that goodbye moment with Gordon where he says, "You're a good cop, Jim." That whole thing. And Gordon's more confused than touched because, like, what is Batman doing complimenting me? But then, over the course of that interrogation scene, you realize that the Riddler is obsessed with both sides of Batman, because he hates Bruce Wayne, because Bruce Wayne is everything, he stands for everything that has made Riddler into the person he is. Yeah. This rich orphan, like, they wanted to be sad for this quote-unquote orphan who lived in a tower with billions of dollars. Riddler's got a point there.
And like, so an ex-MI6 agent to take care of him. And I love they also, like, one thing they do here is that he's got a maid also, right? Who's only in a couple of scenes, but it makes it clear that it's not just Alfred. There's an entire, like, servant class support structure that has, like, been helping Bruce Wayne for the like 10 plus years that since his parents have been killed.
Yeah, so Bruce Wayne stands for that, and he's obsessed and hates Bruce Wayne. But Batman he idolizes, and he loves Batman, and he thinks Batman, like, inspired him to do this in a certain sense, almost in a like, Mark David Chapman way, like the guy who killed Lenin, or the guy who went after Reagan and is, like, weirdly obsessed with, in that case it was Jodie Foster, just the weird, like, obsessions with celebrities. Although it's a little more one-to-one here, because Batman is going around saying, "I'm vengeance." Yeah. And so he's obsessed, loves Batman, and obsessed hates Bruce Wayne. And that is a way of playing with the duality of the character that I've never seen, and I think is fascinating and is really cool, and leads to the movie's ultimate thematic punch, which is Batman saying the words "I was wrong" at the end of the movie, and then aspiring to be something else, which I never thought we were going to get on film. Man, Batman is never allowed to be wrong. It's really cool.
Yeah, that whole scene near the end of the movie of the Riddler talking to Batman and starting with the Bruce Wayne stuff and him going off and off on Bruce Wayne, and you're not sure, and Batman is slowly realizing over the course of it that actually Riddler doesn't realize that he is talking to Bruce Wayne, or probably doesn't realize. There is still like an uncertainty there of whether or not Riddler maybe does know, but is so completely separating the two identities that it doesn't matter to him, or if he's just completely ignorant of it. I think it's like intentionally left uncertain. But you know, he's idolizing the Batman persona as this thing to aspire to, this other side of the coin that Riddler's like trying to set up opportunities through which Batman can flush out and like open up the gateways to the kind of real change that the Riddler wants to see in the world, which is, you know, just like basically, you know, it's Char's fucking meteor from Char's counterattack, just destroy everything, create a blank slate, and from that maybe something better will be built, kind of vision of where he wants things to go. And so in encountering Batman that way, and of just like totally ripping the Bruce Wayne shit to shreds, and Batman having to stand there, hear all of that, and there's like a tear that starts coming in on his eye, which is like a great piece of acting by Robert Pattinson, whether or not like he physically was crying or he had like makeup do it, like whatever that choice was, to have like Batman is like starting to tear up because he is being confronted with like the deep-seated hypocrisy of his life, and it's brutal because he, you know, he has suffered, really, right? Like, it's, you know, obviously the message of this isn't that like rich kids shouldn't be sad when their parents are murdered in front of them. It's awful, it's right. Tragic, it's traumatic, like, you know, it shouldn't happen to anybody. It's, you know, you're a kid, you can't, you know, it's not your fault that you were born by, you know, scumbag rich people that have destroyed a bunch of lives. Like, you're just this child. But Batman isn't a kid anymore. He is a full-grown adult man and has to confront the reality of the life that he's lived in the world that he has lived it in relative to other people. And he's been so blind to that hypocrisy in that, and all that, and the access to power he's had in a structural way that he has blown off multiple times over the course of the movie, where the like progressive politician is like coming up to him being like, Bruce Wayne, like, help us out, do these things, like, you're sitting on all this money, and he's so focused on his like mission to fight the criminal element, and just basically having a fucking temper tantrum as a 30-year-old man. He's, you know, going through, he's doing all of that and having to confront the reality of his own hypocrisy, and confront that, like, while he has been traumatized and it has affected him, that it doesn't excuse or justify any of the shit that he's done, and that he is as much a part of the problem as the Riddler ever was. It is the, you know, it's not the first time I've ever seen a Batman story do it, but it's the first time I've ever seen a live-action Batman movie do it. And it's done incredibly well here. And a big part of that is the way that the Riddler is written and the way that Paul Dano performs it, of this like unhinged two sides of this character, and the way, as you see, he's obsessed with both facets of the Batman persona and shoving that in Bruce Wayne's face, that as Bruce Wayne he has failed, and as Batman he has failed, and that he has gone the wrong direction with both paths of his life.
I mean, just for superhero movies in general, the idea of the hero themselves being wrong is so rare.
Yeah.
Like, there are definitely good movies where there is a larger wrong that they have not realized and then move to right. This is the move Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther both make, in that the heroes in those movies are in an aristocracy sort of thing. They're both kings, and they realize that their culture, their civilization has done wrongs that they must now make up for. But it's not that Thor or T'Challa specifically did the wrong, right? Yeah. And we've always talked about this with Batman. If you are not, like, dealing with Batman doing some weird, heinous shit sometimes, the only way to do it seriously is Batman 66 and make it comic, right? And so they finally do it. I love that. On my second viewing of this movie, there's a move they make here that I caught that I didn't really fully get the first time, that I think is great, where the sequence of events here is they capture the Riddler, and after they capture the Riddler, Batman is in the room with all the cops going through all of the evidence, and he finds the letter to the Batman in the cage with the bat, and they also have the little trowel there that is the tucker for the carpet that he used to kill the mayor. And the card just says, "My confession." And Batman and Gordon don't know what that means, and they just sort of put the tucker thing away. And then Batman goes and talks to Riddler, and that's when Riddler realizes that Batman hasn't figured everything out, and he's like, "Oh, you're not as smart as I thought you were," right? And then Batman goes back, and it's through the interaction with this cop, which is my favorite interaction he has with a cop, because he doesn't say a word in this whole scene, and the cop just keeps offering info. But the cop says, "Hey, my uncle was a construction worker or something, and that's a carpet tool. You use it to you do this thing with the carpet." And Batman realizes that, and it's not spoken, but I feel like the implication of this whole sequence of events is Bruce Wayne has never done a day's honest labor in his life. He has no idea what any of this stuff is. And the Riddler profiled him wrong. The Riddler assumes that Batman is like him, and he's half right. Batman is also an orphan, but he's a very, very privileged orphan who has no idea what this kind of tool is. So Riddler, in his mind's profile of Batman, assumed he would know what the carpet tool was for, but Bruce Wayne would have no point of reference for that thing. And it's not until he meets just a random beat cop who had an uncle who was a blue-collar worker that he figures this out. I think that is a great little thematic thing they do in that scene.
That's great. Yeah, I didn't catch that, because I caught the answer to the confession was the thing that's underneath the carpet. But yes, that's a very good read. I think it is what they're doing there, of that it is the Riddler's idea of Batman is the underprivileged, driven into the dirt, the sort of person on the margins who has risen up to violently throw off those oppressors, when in fact it's in many ways it's the exact opposite of that thing. It is a person who actually was of extreme privilege, who's now using their privilege to fight people who are on the margins, which are criminals and people who oftentimes don't have any other resort other than to move to crime to try to survive. And yes, and that it is all represented by this one tool of labor, that Batman sees it only because before that, he immediately identifies it as the murder weapon, but he's like, oh yeah, that's the murder weapon. If you match it to the wounds, it'll fit the length or whatever. And that's the only thing he sees it as. He doesn't think about what its actual purpose is. Yeah, that's a very good catch.
This is a smart fucking movie.
Yes.
That's the kind of stuff I love.
And the kind of thing you would only catch on a second viewing. It is definitely it was a movie, because I just saw it yesterday, and it was a movie as soon as I came out of it, I did just kind of want to watch it again, as with any great noir movie, because noir movies are full of that kind of stuff where once you know the full scope of the plot and where it's moving, when you rewatch it, you see all these other elements of oh, that's why this character said this line, that's what was happening in this piece. So it's nice to know that will hold true for this film as well.
Oh, it totally does. I was wondering, if I know all of the plot turns, will it be as interesting? And it is, because there's so many other things to pay attention to. And what came through to me on a second viewing was the character side of it. That this is a really well character-arced movie. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about next, is just this general, let's not go through every step of the mystery. That's unnecessary. But the overall thrust of it is Riddler is killing all of these high-ranking government people, the mayor and the police commissioner and the DA, all these high-level people who were directly involved in this very corrupt scheme that Riddler uncovered because he was an accountant for the Gotham Renewal Fund, which is a genuinely good thing Thomas Wayne did, this big $1 billion investment in infrastructure for Gotham, but Thomas Wayne died under circumstances that may or may not have been very corrupt. And then all of the people around him went in like fucking vultures and took over that fund and used it as a big slush fund. And Carmine Falcone came out of that and became basically the de facto mayor of Gotham. That's the overall thing that Bruce uncovers. And then there is this question of his family's culpability in all of it. And that's the Riddler's overall plot. And the Riddler even sees it as him and Batman killing these people together. There's that haunting line where he says, we didn't get Bruce Wayne, but we got the other ones, didn't we? You were in on this with me, buddy. And I think it is it's the perfect version of, if you're going to do a noir story in Batman, this is so perfect. It involves all the big players. It's like Gotham is the most corrupt place on Earth. It's like mind-boggling levels of corruption. It's a great series of payoffs.
Yeah, and it, putting Batman pretty firmly on the wrong side of the line for a lot of the movie. Yes. That he's not actually fighting against the corruption, right? He's fighting against Riddler, and then slowly has to sort of shift tracks onto realizing, there's this whole bigger thing. This isn't just there was a rat that ratted out someone or whatever. It's no, this is as again, like this is the film noir thing, is as you peel back the curtains, it's like you see that there's this whole deep like understructure of corruption that like sort of informs the whole society that you live in, and like the fundamental ways in which it is wrong or corrupt, and having to confront it very directly. And yeah, it's just a very classic massive scheme that Batman, like I think like every little step of the way as it like peels off layer after layer after layer, is very effective. And then for me, the thing that is most effective, and is for certainly for a live action movie, but for even most takes on Batman, it's a pretty radical thing, is the directly putting the Wayne family in there and saying that they were a part of it. Like, to what extent, like, were they bad people, good people, whatever? Like, they were people with power and they did do bad things and they did get this fucking reporter killed. Did Thomas Wayne know that that would happen? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. Thomas Wayne's dead. We have two versions of that story. But that to me is the thing that like is really critical to this story in fully committing to it. Fully committing to Batman having to reconcile with the hypocrisy of what he is and what he represents as a rich, privileged person, enacting his version of vengeance on the world, and then having to see, that he is himself a tool of the corruption he's trying to fight against.
Oh yeah, exactly. There are these like two versions of the story, like you said, and we probably trust Alfred more because Alfred has the better interests at heart, but Alfred also was close to these people, and so like, what is his bias there? But one of my favorite details in all of this is the way the movie uses the song Ave Maria, which is how the movie starts with Riddler looking down the scope at the mayor, and it comes back several times, and we learn that its origin was in this moment that is the primal moment for Riddler, when Thomas Wayne announces his candidacy and the renewal fund at the orphanage, and Riddler was there in the crowd with the kids, and there was a choir singing Ave Maria, and that's why he is obsessed with this song and why the movie keeps coming back to it. And it is such a good like symbol of all of that, is this rich guy Thomas Wayne, on one level trying to do like a lot of good. He's got this orphanage he's made, he's got this renewal fund he's looking into, but he is also trying to become mayor in what is pretty clearly like a vanity bid, and he's prioritizing this, and what will ultimately drive him to do this horrible thing is and this is where I do not fully believe Alfred, is that he didn't do this for his campaign at all. I don't really believe that.
And even if he did, like, it's still like whether or not he did it to save his political career or whether or not he did it to protect the like reputation of his wife. Like either way, he is like being incredibly selfish. One of them is just a slightly more noble version of selfish, but he's still, as a person like is in this position trying to do great public good, like willing to face up to the hardship of having like legitimate things about his family known, right? It's not like the reporter was going to publish something that was a lie. Nobody directly contradicts what the reporter was trying to say, just that he was trying to say things that the Wayne family would like to keep unsaid. And so like instead of choosing to face up against that and deal with it and still try to do public good, instead he tries to get that guy erased. To what extent he knew he was going to get erased is left ambiguous. We don't know. But like at either rate, like he was playing with fire and got a person killed.
Right. And he should have known. Yeah. And even Alfred says he should have known better. That was his mistake. And it's a really, really fascinating sequence of events, and just, as you say, forces Bruce Wayne, and I think really just crucially forces the audience who has never in a Hollywood movie been confronted with this reality that Bruce Wayne comes from incredible power. And like, even if the Waynes meant to do all the good in the world, power has problems associated with it. Let's just put it that way. There's no way to be that powerful and be, completely good with it in that sense, right?
Yeah, there's no high profile politician is squeaky clean, right? Like nobody's getting there and is perfect. Yeah.
I also like that we get 3 different possibilities for what happened to his parents, which is Falcone says, and pretty transparently lying, that Maroni did it. Alfred says it's possible Falcone did it because Thomas Wayne was going to go to the police. But then Alfred also says, or it could have just been some random thug. I also like that he, for the first time ever in a Batman movie, extends empathy to the killer and says, who fell on hard times and got spooked. Like, that little line does a lot for me. And I like that you can read it one of those three ways. And honestly, the thing I get out of the movie is it probably was just some random criminal, because what's Falcone afraid of? That a cop will know something and then he can pay the cop off, right? Like, you know, whatever it is. And I like the possibility that it was also, maybe it was just a totally random act of violence and there is no meaning to it. And either way, we're never going to know, and the movie doesn't try to solve it.
Yeah, and that's, again, that's like this pure noir element of this, and the ambiguity of the past and of history, and how it is like inaccessible even as you're trying to get to it. Or we talked about this a lot with Mask of the Phantasm, because it's like kind of the primary theme of that movie. But it's like you want the past, you want to re-access it, you want it to be real, but it's gone and you can never really know it, experience it again, or you know, feel the things that past used to be to you.
Speaking of Falcone, John Turturro is great in this.
Yes. This was like, him in this was a real like revelation of how the fuck was John Turturro not like a major character in at least one season of The Sopranos? Like, because he's basically just playing a Sopranos character in this, and it's so good as this just scumbag fucking mob boss in the Iceberg Lounge and all that shit. Particularly his scene, we've already talked about in like the daylight of him interacting with Bruce Wayne, and the way he carries himself as so completely untouchable. I love this performance. Like, it makes me very sad that there wasn't some sort of season 7 of The Sopranos with fucking John Turturro as like the season long antagonist or something.
He's phenomenal. It's kind of funny. My brother has not seen a lot of the like movies that John Turturro is actually famous for, like the Coen Brothers movies and stuff. And so he was saying, like, I don't know if I've seen him in a movie this good. And because if your point of reference is the way Hollywood has generally used John Turturro, like in the fucking Transformers movies, that might be true. This is definitely one of the better uses of Turturro in a big budget movie. Like, he's giving an actual John Turturro performance, and that's awesome because he's the other big bad of the movie, right? Like, and he is a villain much in kind of in the way like Christopher Walken is in Batman Returns, you know. Walken a little more heightened, obviously, for a whole bunch of reasons. But yeah, he's very good in this, and I think the whole, because he leaves a big shadow on the movie, and I had actually forgotten he was even going to be in this, so it was just a nice surprise to see a Batman movie with him in it.
Yeah, and it was a thing where I feel like I hadn't seen him in anything in a while, so when he popped on screen, because yeah, I had forgotten if I had heard he was cast. I didn't remember it. And so when he popped up, I'm like, oh my fucking god, it's John Turturro. It was that movie where it's like, this is like one of the best cast movies I've seen in a long time, because holy shit, like every single person is perfect. They are all given really juicy, meaty stuff. Like, that's one of the nice things about it being this long, slow burn movie, is that every actor is given like at least like 3 or 4 big scenes for them to get like really good material. Even if they're playing a character that's relatively minor, they get really good stuff. And so yeah, John Turturro is just an absolute pleasure to have in this movie.
Yeah, I think that's totally true. You know, like, Alfred is only in, I think, 4 scenes I counted, but he is the focus of those 4 scenes and gets great work in all of them. You're right, it's a cast that is both a phenomenal cast and then very well used. I just get the sense Matt Reeves loves working with actors, you know, which is an important thing for a movie like this. And, you know, just on that point of pacing, God, I just love having a big Hollywood movie that breathes like this one does, because it's rare. You know, most superhero movies, certainly the way I think the Marvel model is kind of structured, but even on the other side, I think the Nolan movies move like this. It's just event, like very fast, and you don't sit with stuff that much. And I like sitting with stuff, and this movie is just, it breathes like an actual movie, and that's really cool to me.
Yeah, it's the benefit of it not being an action movie plot. It's a detective story plot. So it's like, its whole framework for how to construct a story is just completely different than almost any other superhero movie. It not only does it give itself that room to breathe, it needs that room to breathe, because if it didn't, the movie would be incomprehensible. Yeah.
The only pacing awkwardness that comes out of the movie to me, other than the very end, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, is it was roughly the Act 2 to Act 3 transition, which is when they get Falcone to going back into the Riddler stuff. I think that transition feels a little awkward, and on a second viewing, I realized it's because the movie is just so good at what it does. It builds the big confrontation with Falcone in such an effectively like invested way, such a compelling way, that when you get the down breath of he's been shot, we fixed, we caught him, all of that stuff. You're back. You realize, oh, now we have to deal with the Riddler. We're back into the action. That's the only part where there's a little awkwardness. It's easy for me to forgive because everything on either side of it is so good. Like, once we jump back into the Riddler stuff, it's, as we've already talked about, some of the best scenes in the whole movie. So it's not a big problem, but I think it's almost like the movie being a victim of its own quality, in that the scenes, like the scene where he goes to get Falcone is where you get that great shot in the hallway lit by gunfire. You know what I mean? It's like, it's that feeling of like a climax, but it's not the movie's actual climax.
Yeah, I definitely had the same feeling that there's like a little bit of a hitch in the pacing. And I think it's almost like there's a little bit of a double-edged sword, because there's something about the effect that I think is narratively compelling in a way, but it also feels to a certain extent unintentional, where because the attention of the movie has been pulled away from the Riddler stuff for such a sustained period of time, that when the Riddler stuff re-injects itself over the Falcone stuff, because the Falcone stuff gets resolved with him being shot, like it feels like you are reminded of, oh wait, fuck, right, like there is this whole other side of this movie that we just haven't been to in a while, and then the stuff that we've been on is so compelling because you've got John Turturro is there giving a incredible performance, you've got this like great action, and Batman is getting this like, you get that a lot of meaty character change stuff of him extending that empathy to Catwoman. You have this great, the 3 visits he takes to the Iceberg Lounge. First time as Batman, the second time as Bruce Wayne, the third time as both of them. He comes as Bruce Wayne stealthily and then transforms to Batman halfway through. All of that has this like great climactic feel to it. And then the rug is pulled out from under you. And I think there's something about like the Riddler reasserting himself into the plot of the movie in a way that is like generally surprising, because you are so invested that you forget about it, that you're kind of almost with Batman in this like, oh fuck, like I've lost sight of like this whole other, like the broader picture of everything that's happening here is I'm chasing Falcone for stuff that happened in the past, and like all these like past crimes that my family was involved in. But there's this like ongoing series of murders I've sort of like forgot that I was chasing after. Some of that is interesting, but I do think that like there probably was a more elegant way to kind of get some of that rug effect and have it be narratively useful, but without it being such a like hard shift that the movie takes.
Yeah, it's, end of the day, it's a good problem to have. It's how do we shift from this good thing to this other good thing? It's because the other thing is that the third act is substantially different. This is the problem the Dark Knight has. We talked about this, where the Dark Knight climaxes its second act with, Two-Face being born and Rachel being blown up and the Joker escaping. And it's a very effective sequence, but then the Joker just goes and does more Joker shit and the movie doesn't change. It just keeps doing what it was already doing. There is a significant change here. That Riddler is behind bars, and then this whole other thing happens. And I think the third act of this movie is fantastic. I think the whole, like, it's a big thing that happens in terms of him blowing the seawall. And if you want to be a fucking CinemaSins idiot, you can go, how did the Riddler get that much C4? And I don't care, because it's a giant visual metaphor that works really well, right?
Yeah, it's such a bold ending. I mean, because it's insane. Like, it's so huge what happens to the movie, like in the city and all of that of... it being it being washed out, that Riddler wants to completely drown the city and the people in it and assassinate the mayor. Even though it's like everything we've seen from this lady seems like, oh yeah, she seems like she'll be a pretty good mayor. Like she seems like she's like really invested. The one scene where she tries to get Bruce Wayne to do some good stuff, nothing in that sequence reads like she's being like underhanded or duplicitous or trying to like get something to further her political goals. It's just like anybody in that seat really just wants gone, because he just wants all of it gone. And yeah, like the visual metaphor, and the both the visual metaphor for the movie, but then also for Batman as a character, right? Like, again, so much of it is about the psychological state of your protagonist, and for him, the city being flooded and it being this like is his failure, that he didn't prevent this earlier, that he didn't make the character shift he needed, he didn't become the person he needed to be to keep this from happening earlier, has caused like everything to be destroyed, and everything is washed away, and he has to, like, from that, in an almost like baptismal sense, he has to be like reborn as a better version of who he is, because he himself needs to be washed away in this corruption. Like, it's such a powerful, big scale metaphor that, like, they fully commit to, way more so than I thought. Like, when the sequence was started, I thought that maybe, oh, this is like not like they're going to find a way to stop the water from getting all the way in, or something's going to happen. It's like, no, Batman doesn't prevent the flooding at all. Batman completely fails to stop Riddler's plan. Like, all he does is become a nicer person, and he saves the mayor. Like, he doesn't save every single person in Gotham. He doesn't stop the flood. He doesn't do any of that shit. Like, he resolutely fails as a Batman. He just changes successfully as a character.
And I think it's really key that the final tension of the movie is something Batman can't punch away.
Yeah.
He can't fight a flood, right? There is no way to fist fight the flood into submission. And even with all of the Riddler's goons that come out, which is this whole really interesting prescient thing they do with, like, the online extremism and stuff, there's only so much he can do against that, because this is a whole element that is bigger than what he had anticipated, right? He winds up needing Catwoman and Gordon's help to overcome those guys as well, because he's dealing with so many things. And then, of course, I think, the really, really smart key character turn the movie makes is when I do love the thing where he has fucking adrenaline on him and a hole in the suit ready to inject adrenaline. He does all of that. He beats the guy. Gordon stops him before he goes too far. And then the dude says, "I'm vengeance." And I cannot tell you, Sean, how happy I am for a Batman movie to take a dumb Batman line like, "I'm vengeance," and make clear that it was a dumb Batman line, right?
Yes.
Like, that is a line that in the Zack Snyder Batman would have been said completely seriously, and you were supposed to think Batman is cool for that, right? And in this movie, it's, you're a 30-year-old having a fucking temper tantrum with poor people, right?
Yes.
Like, and he has to confront that, and he has to look down at the flood and go, I can't fist fight this thing. What can I actually do? And what he can do is go down into the waters with everyone and be a beacon of light and take them out of there. And it's an obvious metaphor. It's even a little heavy-handed, but it's really good. And I think it's key for giving Batman an actual character arc where he's fundamentally different at the end of this movie.
Yeah, and I think there's just something very powerful to me. And this is where it becomes Batman and not, like, neo-noir, right? This is the thing that distinguishes Batman from, like, other neo-noir type stuff, is that at the end of the day, he is a hero, right? And so it's like this specific character arc of him learning, like, I need to use who I am not to hurt people, but to help people, is like a very Batman message, right? And it's him taking that first step towards the aspirational version of Batman. And it's a really compelling arc, right? It's a thing where one, it's just nice to see it done in a Batman movie. Batman's such a static character in every Batman movie. That's just true. That's just true of all the live action Batman movies. Batman is just like a completely fucking static character. Even good ones, right? The Batman in the 1966 Batman is still a static character. This is just not a problem with that movie, but he's always static. Whereas in other media, he's usually like very, it's a story arc by story arc basis, but he changes over the course of the story because he's the protagonist. It's from his perspective. The stories are heavily involved and invested in him as a psychological character who needs to change and grow over the course of the adventure that he encounters. And so actually having the movie be so invested in Batman's character to give him this full holistic arc that has this clear track from beginning to end, and it is almost heavy-handed, but in a way that is satisfying, like it should be, because it is still a superhero movie. I want some of the heavy-handedness. I want some of the, like, big dramatic symbolism, and because that's the superhero quality. That's the heightened fantastic quality of it. Is it's big, and I want him to do the, like, reverse version of the fucking dark narration he did at the beginning of the movie with the fucking Nirvana song. Like, I want all of that. Like, I want it being, like, big and in your face, because it still should have that superheroic quality to it. And
that iconic
just fit it into the plot and the setting and the style of this noir type story.
And what I was going to say is, and that iconic quality, because there is this really smart move where when he when he becomes the light, when he becomes a hero, he has this big red flare. And I would bet money that the reason why this movie is colored red and black is because that was the first image Matt Reeves came up with. Was like, this movie will end with Batman in a big dark puddle of water, or more than a puddle, and he's going to light a big red flare and pull people to him with that, because that shot of like him guiding everyone out of the water with the big red torch, that's the primal image of the entire movie. And, like, one of the reasons this movie was very confidently made is, like, before they had shot a frame of it, all the marketing was done with the red and black. And it's just very clear that was the color scheme Matt Reeves had intended for this film. And I feel like it reads backwards out of that final image of why do these two images contrast in the movie so much. It's because in the final image of the heroic arc, they come together, It's just good visual storytelling on that level. This is not a movie you could turn black and white. The red is really important to it.
Yeah, and it's the, he starts the movie with his whole spiel, right, with his opening narration, which one is really elegantly written to initially feel like it could either be the serial killer talking or it could be Batman, and you're not sure until he gets a bit into it, because he's talking about blending into the shadows, like he's hiding amongst the people, selecting his targets very carefully. It's very serial killer type talk, but it's all very dark, anonymous. He's submerged in like the general populace, like a predator, or like a wolf wearing sheep's clothing in the darkness, trying to find people. And at the end of the movie, he is a beacon guiding people towards hope and towards like safety, and using like that big dramatic red color contrasted with like the dark shadow of what he was at the beginning. As you say, like it is just the whole movie is built with this sort of general color scheme in mind, building towards this iconic image that creates this very dramatic, powerful, iconic character arc. And I just, I always want, really, for my like big superhero characters like a Batman, or for the love of God, Superman, for the love of God, for Superman in particular, I want them to be aspirational and hopeful characters and iconic and larger than life, because it's like it is what they are. They're superheroes. And even Batman, and I'm glad we have this big popular movie now that is evidence of this, even Batman can have all the cool, dark, violent, psychological stuff that you want from a like adult, mature take on Batman, and still have the fun, aspirational part that gets at the like 8-year-old in your heart, right? Like you can do both those things, because that is literally what Batman is. He's been doing it for like 80 fucking 90 years at this point.
And Sean, you saying all of that, I think, is a good segue into my problem with how the movie chooses to end, which is, and it's not a macro problem. It's all the choices are right. It's more of a micro thing here, where you have all of the themes that you were just laying out. His final narration as he's on the roof of the Madison Square Garden thing is him talking about how, vengeance is wrong because you can't change the past. I think the writing here is actually really beautiful, where he talks about scars and that they hurt and they're painful, but that we don't have to wallow in them. We can learn from them is the gist of it, basically. Yeah. And he says, and I can be different. He directly says the words, like, I didn't have the effect I hoped to have, right? Like, Batman very definitively says he was wrong at the end of this movie. And so he finishes that speech, and he's looking up at the helicopter pulling off with the mayor's son, who's like a kind of key motif through the movie, is Batman's empathy for this kid who was also orphaned, right?
Yeah.
Which, again, Batman, empathy, very important.
Yep.
Matt Reeves gets his shit. And I think I wanted the movie to cut there. I felt like it was supposed to cut there. I thought Batman looking up, finishing the narration, literally looking up, aspirational, right? I just expected the movie was going to cut to credits there, directed by Matt Reeves. Instead, we get 2 more scenes. It's not like a ton more movie, but it's a little more movie. We get the scene at Arkham with the Riddler and the Joker that is just it's an end credits scene that escaped from the end credits, and I don't know why it's there. We'll talk about that in a second. And then you get the last scene with Batman and Catwoman, which is a good scene. And I know why Matt Reeves shot it, and I understand its intention. And there is sort of a like classic movie noir feeling of it, of the femme fatale and the hero saying goodbye, going off in separate directions. I think it's beautifully shot. I think that last image they choose of, you have Batman on the bike, Then you cut to him looking in the rearview mirror. It's one final bit of voyeurism as he's looking back on her, because voyeuristic looking is like a huge visual theme in the movie. It's the first shot of the movie. It's all through. And then he looks forward and he has this determined look on his face, and the Giacchino score swells and it ends. It's not a bad ending that in any way ruins the movie for me at all. I want to be very clear on that. I just think the strongest possible version of this movie cuts on the roof of the Gotham Square Garden. It's not horrible, not saying any of that, but that is what I think.
I'm 100% with you that it felt like they had such a powerful ending point there, that to extend it. And I mean, there's stuff about the Riddler Joker scene that I like, even as not like a post-credits scene. Like, I like, I do think it is important to have at least the sensation of that, like, the Riddler's not gone for good, right? It's a very important Batman-y kind of thing and noir kind of thing of that, even if, you're helping these people and you found your way towards goodness, that, like, the corruption and the darkness and all of that is not totally gone. I think there is some utility to that. I don't think it's, like, a necessary scene and I would have cut it, but I do see some of the argument of, like, leaving it even not as a post-credits scene. But they should have cut it. And then the Catwoman one is, I'm with you that, like, I think it's a very nice scene. I like that little last bit. I like them, like, both coming to the end of that, like, tunnel and her turning one way, Batman waiting, him going the other way. Like, it's such a nicely constructed sequence. But I just think it kind of feels misaligned I think that feels like an ending to a movie where Batman and Catwoman's relationship is more primary to the movie than it was in The Batman. Like, not to say that it was an afterthought or something. It's a very important part of the movie, but it's not the main thing the movie's about, right? The main thing that it is about is Batman confronting his past, and it's less about him confronting his relationship with Catwoman or something like that. And so it just feels like putting the ending of the movie on his relationship with Catwoman, it just feels like a slight misreading of what the movie ultimately was specifically about. And there was no place before the very more natural ending point to put a little, like, resolutory moment for Catwoman and Batman, which I like having. Like, it is nice to have a little moment with those characters, like, after, the action is done. It's just like the way that the rest of the ending sequences were constructed doesn't give a natural place for that to happen. And instead, the natural place for the ending would have been right at the end of that helicopter sequence, of him looking up and it going away and his narration ending. It just feels so clearly like the best ending spot for the movie.
Yeah. And again, I don't think it's that big a problem.
No.
Steven Spielberg is one of the best directors who's ever lived, and he is terrible at ending movies after basically Raiders of the Lost Ark. We both love his movie Lincoln. Lincoln goes a good 10 minutes too long with random bullshit.
Lincoln is a like much more dramatic example of this problem of having, like, such a perfect ending shot, and then you've just got, like, 2 or 3 scenes and it just goes on. Yeah, it is a pretty common thing for lots of movies that, like, you get the 1 or 2 extra scenes and you're left a little bit. It always feels like, I don't make movies, but as, like, someone who writes, right? Like, I see that problem of, like, there was a version of something that was very precious to you as a creator, and you've, like, left it there because it's like this version of this thing was so important, but the rest of what the essay or the piece or the poem or whatever it is has changed enough that it no longer really belongs there. And it's one of those of, like, sometimes you just gotta cut the darlings out, right? You just gotta cut, even if it's like you loved this scene to death. And that motorcycle scene with Batman and Catwoman in particular is such a lovingly constructed scene. It feels like a scene that I'm guessing Matt Reeves, like, came up with, and he's like, God, this is such a great idea for the sequence. I really want to do it. And it is a really great scene. It just doesn't belong in the movie and should have been cut. But it's not like a critical flaw or anything. It's just, in an otherwise, like, pretty fucking perfect, solid movie, it's a rare misstep the movie makes.
Yeah, which, again, I've seen movies have much worse problems than this, including other Batman movies. So, it's whatever. Let's talk about the scene with Riddler and the Joker there, though. I think it's doing some interesting stuff. I do have to admit, Sean, in my heart of hearts, I would love for Robert Pattinson's Batman to never meet the Joker. Mm-hmm. I would like to ignore the Joker. I would like Congress to pass an act saying we cannot use the Joker in movies for 50 years. Just until my natural death, please never do the Joker again. I'm done with it. In my lifetime, 2 actors have won Oscars for playing the Joker. That's too many Jokers. We can stop now. But it was still a pretty decent scene. And the guy they cast there is Barry Keoghan, who's one of the only actors you could do as Joker and not have me immediately roll my eyes and go, please God, kill me. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm with you that I don't need Joker. I mean, I think it specifically works with this scene because it's like it is obviously, you're a Batman fan. You know it's obviously the Joker, the laugh, like all that shit happens and the way he's obscured. It makes it clear that it's supposed to be the Joker. But for like the actual scene as it exists, the point is more just that like there are other damaged people, other people on the margins out there that are looking to like, you know, lash out at society, and that the Riddler is not alone, and that like evil is not defeated or whatever, and it's like, you know, cruelty and all the like those things in the world are not stamped out because Batman had a change of heart, you know, like that is like a effective thing, and it being like a Joker cameo is kind of whatever. But yeah, I don't need the Joker. I haven't seen anything I think that actor has been in, but I'll take it on good faith that like, I mean, the rest of the movie is so immaculately cast. Obviously, whoever the cast of the Joker would be very good casting. It's just that like Batman is one of those superheroes that like very rarely, if there's only a couple like Spider-Man, that has such a rich cast of villains. There's so many good villains that there are a bunch of villains that have never been in movies that you could use in a sequel to this that would be awesome that are not the Joker. Or there are villains like Mr. Freeze or Poison Ivy that you could pull for like a more fantastical villain for a second movie that have been in movies before, but are not great takes on those characters. It would be cool to do like a good take on a character that's been done poorly, rather than doing another take on a character that has, at least, you know, Heath Ledger's version is like iconic and amazing. People seem to like the new Joker movie. You know, I have a lot of fondness for the Jack Nicholson one, even though there are issues with it in '89 Batman. And of course, like classic '66 Batman is fucking amazing. We don't need another.
Well, you're forgetting Joker. Jared Leto, the best Joker.
Oh yeah,
I'm kidding. I can't even say that.
Morbius, the living vampire?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
It's you know, and here's the thing: the explanation you gave is almost word for word, eerily, an interview Matt Reeves gave the other day, where they asked him, "Is this the Joker?" And he said, "Yes." And they said, "Does that mean Batman 2 is the Joker?" And he said, "No, it doesn't. Maybe, but the point of this scene was exactly what you described, Sean, which is that the world is not settled. It's very unsettled at the end of this movie, and I wanted to drive that home, and this seemed like a fun way to do it. So, and I would take him at his word. They have not written Batman 2 yet. They are not committed to using Joker. I would love, honestly, I thought this several times through this movie. They could do a really good Poison Ivy in this world. Mm-hmm. I would love a movie where Poison Ivy is out there blowing up factories or something to get rid of coal production, and at first Batman thinks she's a villain, but the twist in the movie is she finally brings Batman around to her way of thinking, because climate change is bad, and he helps her blow up a plant or something. That'd be great.
Yeah, Poison Ivy would be good. Like, this is finally, if, you know, it just seems like they'll probably make a sequel to this, because it's making a lot of money. It's time for Robin. You know, they finally have it, right? They finally have a Batman that's good enough, and a filmmaker that's good enough that you can do Robin and do it well in live action. And it's like, as a Batman fan, that is like the thing I so fucking desperately need from a live action Batman movie. Yes. Both because I just want to see it, and because I want the rest of the world to know that Robin is cool and Robin is good and Robin is like a vital, necessary part of the larger Batman mythos. And we finally have a scenario where that can happen.
I 100% think if I were Matt Reeves, my North Star for Batman 2 would be Robin is going to be the heart of this thing, and what do I build around it to have a plot where Batman's character growth that we did in movie 1 is actualized in movie 2 through him taking in this kid.
Yeah, it's right? Such a, like, because that was like the immediate thought I had coming out of the movie theater. I was like, God, I hope they make a sequel to this movie. And then as soon as I thought about the sequel to this movie, I'm like, Robin, like the idea of, like, you know, the whole like general scope of a movie, I feel like slots so clearly into place for exactly that reason of, like, it's the best way that you can take Batman's character growth and not have to reset it to a certain extent, which I think is what a lot of creators would struggle with, is if you just, all you want to do is gritty, dark Batman, and that's the only thing you're interested in, well, then you can't have Batman have the character arc. And that's part of the problem with a lot of lesser Batman stories, is that he's just stuck in that mode infinitely, because anytime he takes a step out of it, he has to be reset back into it. Robin is like one of those things that if we're taking this young version of Batman and having him move towards the older, more aspirational version we see in most of the comic books and the cartoons and stuff, Robin is like the key element that has always been the connective tissue that does that for him as a character, and it would be the perfect thing to give you a spine of a second movie.
Yeah. And there's so many exciting ways you could do it. It could be one of the existing Robins. You could create a whole new character. There's lots of things you could do that I think Batman fans and the general public would accept. You know, they do it. You could do Carrie Kelly Robin, and I think that would be cool. Like there's lots of young actors who would be exciting for any incarnation of this. So I really hope we get that.
Yeah. Catwoman at the end of this movie name drops Bloodhaven, which is the sister city that Nightwing is in the comic books, which immediately was one of the things that jumped out at me. Was like, oh, he's laying the fucking groundwork. You can do a Robin, and then in the third movie you can have him become Nightwing and go to Bloodhaven, do a Nightwing movie, and holy shit, that'd be fucking awesome. Nightwing's very good.
Be great. You know, HBO Max needs fucking content. They've already greenlit a Penguin miniseries. Just put all the pieces on the board. Get our Robin, our Nightwing miniseries. Yeah. Yes. Anyway, doubling back, two key things to talk about here. The cinematography by Greg Fraser and the music by Michael Giacchino. Mm-hmm. I want to start with the music. Low-key, Michael Giacchino is the MVP of this movie. This is a stupendous movie score. It's the first superhero movie score in God knows how long that attempts to do actual melodies that you will hum coming out of the theater and motifs and stuff. But it is also, and this really was hammered home for me on a second viewing, moment to moment, this is like John Williams caliber, really, really good film scoring of like attuned to the needs of the scene, in addition to having these big motifs that you're just never going to forget after seeing the movie.
Yeah, the core Batman theme in particular is so striking and so effective that it evokes a lot of like the classic Batman themes, but is not those. Like it's very much its own thing. It's very impressive for a character that has had a number of different like really great musical themes over the years. To have something that like fits in that wheelhouse perfectly, but still is very distinctive, is very impressive. But yes, it's the whole score has that quality to it. And one thing I loved about the score was the Nirvana song, which really fucked with my head because they put elements of the Batman theme in it. So it I had the hardest time figuring out what the is that a new song that sounds like a Nirvana song? Is it a Nirvana song? What the fuck is even happening? Because I remember talking with my dad, because I went to see it with my dad afterwards, and trying to figure out if that was a song. I was like, I don't think it's an existing song, because they had a whole acoustic guitar part that was just the Batman theme in that song. What the fuck's happening? I mean, I thought that was it really went mess with my head. But I thought that I don't know if I've ever seen a movie do that, take an existing song and remix it to incorporate specific new melodies and elements from the original film score, injecting it into a pre-existing pop song is pretty cool.
It is cool. I mean, and that music, that must have been there from the scripting level, because that's in the trailer for the first trailer they ever did back when they had shot 1 month of the movie and then COVID shut them down. Remember, they did a little teaser, which is very fun to go back and watch, because you can tell what parts of the movie they had shot first. Because what did they have to, Alfred had not shot anything yet, because you got a little bit of Andy Serkis did some VO for it, but it's not any of his stuff from the movie. Stuff like that I think is very funny. But yeah, it's the use of the Nirvana song, which is Something in the Way. This great song, great use of that song, both times they do it. But yeah, it's a really tremendous score. And Michael Giacchino is someone who has always been eminently very talented, but I have not loved a lot of his work lately. I think his music in the Spider-Man movies is boring and bad. The Spider-Man theme in those movies is just dull as shit. His best stuff he's done in the last 10 years has been with Matt Reeves on Let Me In, and then the two Apes movies they did are phenomenal scores. But, my favorite Michael Giacchino thing has always been Lost, which he did 6 seasons of, and it's this incredible, intricate score over 6 seasons of TV. It's kind of unprecedented on American TV. The only other thing since would be kind of Game of Thrones, but I think Lost was even better at that.
Yeah, or Doctor Who, obviously.
Doctor Who Murray Gold got to do that over a number of years, but anyway, he's a great composer, and this is just such a good score. And then the cinematography by Greg Fraser. Holy shit. Like, this is a complex, cool image using so much, like, dark, negative space. Like, genuinely using, like, negative space within the image to, like, draw your eye in. And all the stuff it does with colors and blurring, like I said. A lot of cool effects, like, just the nerd in me I've learned about were used, like... Fraser also shot The Mandalorian, and it was on The Mandalorian that he came up with this new effects thing they've started doing called I forget what they call it, but it's basically a big video wall.
Yeah.
Where it's basically like a modern version of rear projection, where they have super, super high quality, bright LED screens around like where the green screen would be. And they can put whatever they want on there and adjust depth of field and all sorts of effects, which means instead of having to composite an image in later on a green screen, which can look really bad, as every Marvel movie lately has taught us, you can do it all in camera, and it can look really good, and The Mandalorian did that. Greg Fraser also shot Dune, which he has an Oscar nomination for, and deservedly, obviously great-looking movie. And then they used it on The Batman. And I can even probably tell you which scenes. Like, I would imagine all the scenes where they're on the, like, building where the bat signal are probably benefit from that, because that normally would be a soundstage with either a matte painting or a green screen, but it looks really, really good. And then also, this movie was shot digitally. It was shot on an Arri Alexa, but Greg Fraser also did this on Dune, and I think this is fucking ingenious. They shot the whole movie digitally, and then they printed out what they needed they printed out all the footage onto a film negative, onto physical film, scanned the film back in at like super high, 8K resolution or whatever, and that became the digital intermediate. So they got all the benefits of shooting digitally and didn't have to pay for film and all of that. But then there's actual real film grain and halation and all the things that physical film gets you on the final image. Dune, like I said, did the same thing. And both of these movies, I had trouble in the theater figuring out how they shot the movie, because the answer is it's kind of a weird hybrid. That's an ingenious move to me that I think more movies should do, because it's a really creative way of getting around the film versus digital thing. And it's such a good-looking movie.
Yeah, it makes the movie look fantastic. And it is a thing where I think, like, it feels like we're right on the edge of there being, like, a big, like, paradigm shift in a lot of, like, effects in movies, specifically with the sort of the sphere you're talking about, or, like, the like, real virtual set, because, like, one of the things that's interesting about that, I know this for sure on Mandalorian, I assume it's probably true in The Batman as well, is that the imagery that is on the set is built using Unreal Engine 4, because video game engines are, like, the thing, because video game engines have to render things in real time, which traditional movie special effects aren't. They're all pre-rendered, so you make your immaculate image, and then you just have computers spend fucking forever actually, like, generating it and like creating the image for a video sequence. With a video game engine, you can change things dynamically and move the camera, and so you have a physical camera that then is attached to a sort of virtual camera in the software. So with a physical actual camera moves, the perspective shifts on the sort of generated virtual background that's being projected onto or being displayed through the super bright LED screens, so that the camera can move perfectly, and actors are actually standing on a set being able to look out into the distance of what, like, audiences will be able to see. And all the lighting is perfect because the LEDs are bright enough that the lighting that is being created through the virtual environment, with super high-res photo scans in UE4, actually projects lighting onto the actors physically standing there. And as I say, like, only a few productions have actually used that. I think one of the first ones that did an early version of it was that sci-fi movie Oblivion with Tom Cruise. But it feels like it's becoming common enough that I'm very excited that hopefully more productions are going to start making use of that, especially as UE5 gets better. It'll probably be more distributed, because I know Epic wants to get deeper into that. Because, yes, I didn't know it was used for this movie, but it makes perfect sense, because it has that same quality that The Mandalorian has, where there are some scenes where you're like, how did they shoot this? Because it doesn't seem like they went to, like, an actual building, because this skyline is fake. But it's obviously not a matte painting, and it looks way too good to be green screen. Because even great green screen, oftentimes you can kind of feel some of the fakeness. The lighting might be slightly off and stuff like that. It has a really immaculate production design to it, that I really hope that stuff becomes more common. Because I would love for more movies most movies are not going to be able to look as good as the Batman because they're not going to be as well shot and all that kind of stuff. But they could at least get some of like that, like the immaculate quality of some of the effects if this becomes a more widespread technique.
Yeah, I'm reading the Wikipedia page for The Mandalorian actually has a really good description of all of this. The technology is called stagecraft, and it was made by ILM and Epic Games together to invent this. But what it came from, obviously Greg Fraser worked on it, but also Jon Favreau, who directed or created The Mandalorian, he had this idea from doing The Jungle Book, the movie he did, where there is the physical kid, Mowgli, but everything else is CGI. And one of the things he did to make it look good is that they did have big screens with images on them while shooting. None of that's in the movie because it's all filled in with CGI, but he wanted actual lighting on the kid that reflected what they were doing. And he really liked that, but it was a little time consuming because they hadn't created a full process for it. And so then with The Lion King he did, and then The Mandalorian, they really hammered this out. And now there's a lot of movies lining up to use this. And clearly Greg Fraser is being like hired by all these people because he's the DP who's done this and figured it like out how to do it. So this has become kind of his calling card. But like the biggest thing it solves for me, Sean, is the lighting issue. Because you can do good green screening. It is possible. It's been done for decades. But you need to be good at it. And part of being good at it means lining up the lighting in such a way that everything will look right in the final image. The Marvel movies are really bad at this. And it's become worse and worse, where just they light the movies very flatly. And the lighting on the characters, when you do the green screen stuff, just never reflects their surroundings. Spider-Man No Way Home was really bad about this, where like the characters never looked like they were actually situated in the environments because the lighting was just, there was no care taken for it. And Marvel is kind of a factory that moves really fast. So I don't know how you can fix that with the existing technology. But I think it's, Jon Favreau put it as like, it's like instead of taking actors to location, you take the location to the actors. And, sometimes you want actual location work, obviously, but in a big effects movie, or a very like backlot movie like The Batman, this is really ideal. It also keeps costs down in some ways.
Particularly for a TV production like The Mandalorian, like you can't, you can't do that. You can't make a brand new alien world for every single episode of your TV show. Like Doctor Who knows very well how like thin your budget is stretched in trying to do production like that. Like it definitely, if any like, prospective film students listen to the podcast, like this is stuff that'll be in like the film textbook of tomorrow, right? Like this, it really feels to me like it's part of like the big shift in like what visual effects are going to be like in the years to come. And probably Greg Fraser his name will be in there as like one of like the great, DPs in the history of film and like pushing that like style forward.
It's kind of like how, the guy who shot Citizen Kane was Greg Toland.
Toland.
And he became a famous movie Greg because he was so good at figuring out like the thing that Citizen Kane innovated, which was shooting on higher speed film stocks that could catch more light, which meant that you could do the really deep chiaroscuro lighting that is necessary for that kind of film. And he shot a lot of movies like that in the years to come because he was a fucking expert on it, Yeah. So it's cool stuff. The Batman is just an impressive production all over and makes you excited for the future of Hollywood in some ways, in part because we finally got a real Batman movie.
Yes, it's like it is such a rewarding conclusion to the very long thing we've done of rewatching all those old Batman movies, some of which was very fun to revisit. We also watched Batman and Robin and Batman Forever, which were particularly brutal to revisit. But all of it was building up to this moment of where we were both so excited by everything we were seeing and hearing about this movie. It is extremely gratifying to get to the end of that and be like, and after this long journey, they finally made a live action Batman movie. We've done, how many podcasts have we done? Like 10, 11?
We did 10 parts of Batman on film,
Yeah, so it's like finally after 10 separate parts on part 11, we finally actually talked about a live action Batman movie. It's amazing.
It is amazing. Will you do one last thing with me, Sean, before we wrap for today?
Okay.
Will you rank all of the live-action Batman movies with me?
Okay. Sure.
I was always planning on doing this when we got to the end of the Batman on Film series, but I don't know when we're going to get to the end of it. So for now, let's just do it with the movies we have, all of the live-action ones so far. Do we count Batman v Superman in this?
let's leave that out of it because
Okay.
I would want to rewatch whatever like the director's cut or
Okay.
ultimate edition or whatever. So if we continue seeing some of the other stuff in like Red Hood, we could do a more comprehensive one eventually incorporating the animated stuff also.
So the solo Batman movies, we have 66, 89, Batman Returns, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, the 3 Nolan movies, and The Batman. That's all of them, right?
Yes.
Okay. Number 1 is The Batman.
Yes. Yeah.
There's just not even a contest.
It's pretty easy. Yeah.
Yeah. If you are someone trying to tell me that this is not the best Batman movie, I do kind of question your critical judgment.
Yeah.
What's number 2 and 3 are 66 and Batman Returns.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Are you saying in that order number 2 is 66?
No, but
okay.
it could be that order.
Because I would say Batman Returns and then 66. So 2 for Batman Returns, 3 for 66.
That's basically that's how I did it on Twitter the other day when I made this joke. Because those are the 3 good ones, and everything else I don't really care about. But those are the top 3. Okay. Big jump. What's number 4?
I mean, it would either have to be 89 Batman or Batman Begins for me.
I think that's correct.
Yeah.
And that is a really tough one.
Yeah. Like...
Batman Begins, more coherent story. Batman 89, it looks so fucking good.
Yeah. I think I'll go... I think I'll give it to Burton and have him be 89 Batman above Batman Begins feels right to me. There's something about like the production of that movie is so luscious. I would definitely say that like watching that on like 4K Blu-ray, that was a like incredible movie to watch on 4K Blu-ray. Whereas like Batman Begins is like, it looks fine. You know, it's got some good stuff in it, but.
And, you know, Michael Keaton never got to do as much as Batman as we wanted. He is really fucking good in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so 5 is Batman Begins. 6, what's next? Is it The Dark Knight?
Yeah, I mean, because we have left is Dark Knight, Dark Knight Rises, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin. The Dark Knight is the best of those ones. Yeah, that's for sure.
Okay. So yeah, the ones we have left are. You're gonna laugh at me. I typed that as The Dark Knight Returns. We just keep making that until the end of time.
Joke in the history of this podcast. Yeah.
Okay, Dark Knight Rises, Batman and Robin, Batman Forever. There's a spiteful part of me that wants to put Dark Knight Rises at the very bottom, even though I know it's technically a better movie than those other 2, but I fucking hate it.
Yeah, it's like, this is really the, like, who gives a shit section. It's like it's like when we do our Weekly Suit Gundam, there's, like, at the very bottom, we've got, like, you know, G-Savior and shit like that. It's like, do I even really want to bother ranking this? Because, I mean, honestly, dude, I wouldn't fight you on putting Dark Knight Rises at the very bottom. I think there's like an amusing, there's a so bad it's good quality to sections of Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. I had a good time tweeting out ridiculous shit like of them like reversing the footage on Batman when he was drowning in Batman and Robin and shit like that. There's like the incessantly horny nature of fucking Batman Forever and like the love interest in that movie is fucking utterly ridiculous.
You know, I think what's funny here, like, I would probably put Batman and Robin at the top of these 3 because it is the most so bad it's good. Like, it has stuff I think is fucking funny in it.
Got the ice puns with Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know?
Yeah. So, okay, I'm putting Batman and Robin beneath The Dark Knight. Then for 8 and 9, do we do it in Be Legends and put Dark Knight Rises at the very bottom and just say fuck it? Or do we put Forever at the bottom? Because Forever is a really bad movie.
Yeah, I mean, you got all the Robin shit. In both those movies is bad. It's like, man, both those are so 2 really fucking bad movies. Remember Tommy Lee Jones in Batman Forever? Remember when they put Two-Face in it and he was just like Joker? They just gave Tommy Lee Jones a bunch of fucking cocaine. Remember his, like, he's got his layer that's like cut in half and like it's got like the like devil lady and the angel lady. And everything that movie just looks like it was shot for like $5. You know, but
The Dark Knight Rises is fucking Fox News porn.
Yeah, like, I think the thing is, this is why I'm kind of compelled to put Dark Knight Rises at the bottom. Is I just find it like a kind of reprehensible movie. Whereas like Batman Forever is like a, what the fuck are you even like really going for? You know, it's like Batman Forever has like the most gaudy lighting in a movie I've ever seen, but at least like the lighting is gaudy. It's not just like boring and stale, which is kind of what I feel like a lot of like the Christopher Nolan aesthetic feels like to me. And it doesn't have like totally fucking awful, just like shoving it in your face, like Bush era, early to mid 2000s American right wing conservative politics in it. So that's a plus.
I mean, it's worse than Bush era. I mean, we were 2012 at that point. That one is like presaging Trump shit. I mean, it is.
That's true.
It is right-wing bullshit. Okay, so worst to best, we have it as 9, Dark Knight Rises, 8, Batman Forever, 7, Batman and Robin, 6, The Dark Knight, 5, Batman Begins, 4, Batman 89, 3, Batman 66, 2, Batman Returns, 1, The Batman.
Yeah, that's...
Most of that list is bad, but those top 3 are very good.
Yeah, there's definitely like, I feel like there are 3 very distinct tiers. It's like, here's the good Batman movies, here's the middling Batman movies that aren't awful, but they all have like pretty distinct issues, and then here's the like, don't bother watching the Batman movies at the very bottom.
Yes. Okay, so we've got our list. Final question for today.
Yeah.
There's one theatrical Batman movie we left off of there.
Uh-huh.
What is the best theatrical Batman movie? Is it The Batman or is it Mask of the Phantasm?
I mean, I would still say Mask of the Phantasm is better than The Batman. The Batman is very good.
I think I lean towards where you're going there.
Yeah,
I think that's probably right. It's not putting down The Batman at all.
No.
Mask of the Phantasm is a fucking masterpiece.
Yeah, Mask of the Phantasm is and they're so good, but like they're 2 movies that just go very well together. Like they both have their head on totally straight. Like Mask of the Phantasm, like, I mean, it's technically neo-noir in that it wasn't literally made in like the 40s, but it is like stylistically classic noir, and this is like neo-noir Batman in the sense that it's got like the 70s grounded realism side to it, and so they feel like 2 sides of the same coin on like a good cinematic approach to Batman. One is more classic Art Deco, like, you know, big flashbacks, all that shit, like classic noir, and one of them is the more gritty 70s style. So they go hand in hand. They're 2 movies that go great together, but I would still put Mask of the Phantasm on top.
I think you're right, and I think you're right about all of that, because we even talked about that on our Mask of the Phantasm episode, how striking it is that it's not a neo-noir at all. It really is just a classical, like, 40s film noir down to the flashback structure and everything. It's like out of the past or something. Very good stuff. All right. Well, Sean, we finally got to talk about a good Batman movie. After all the Nolan shit.
Yep.
And we got good stuff in the weeks to come, but I'm just glad that The Batman was so good.
Everybody likes a happy ending, and that's what we finally got with our Batman movies.